while we grope amidst today's crumbs. We are infants, glutted on sorrow, tears, and blood. We are adults, toiling for driblets. We are the hitherto woke, now awakened, demanding better. We are the questions that will grind your teeth. We are the meal that will choke you to surrender. We are the answers that will not be swallowed in your divide and rule games. We are the puppies of a scoundrel country, determined to ride through myriad upheavals. We are the midwives of this unstoppable rebirth, and we will no longer be silenced. That was answers that will not be swallowed. I hope I'm not boring you. So I want to look for something playful to read. Would you like something playful? Or we want another national problem? No. Okay, so some people think that literature should be escape, right? So you write stories that will make people forget all the sadness going on around them. I don't know if you agree with that. That works, but sometimes we need to write stories that will enlighten us, wake us up. Okay. So let me read a love poem. Sorry, how old are you? In the uniform? Yes, how old are you? You are 16. Do we have someone less than 16 here? How old are you? 14.
At least the...
Okay. I changed my mind.
No,
the poem I was going to read is titled Loving You is to Awaken. You can find it in my poetry album, which is available there. It has me singing a love song, and then reciting the poetry. So let's read something that is love, but not... It's hard though, this thing you were asking me to do. You didn't? Okay, let me read a Boko Haram poem. Oh, okay. I thought somebody said they didn't ask for love, they want Boko Haram. I will give you Boko Haram. There's plenty. I'm trying to be politically correct here because we have a 14-year-old in the audience. One part of me is hoping that I can read this and it will fly by their head. Actually, it is safe. I've just seen it. It is safe. Okay. So this poem is loving you. Loving you is to awaken. Loving you. Loving you is to awaken. Loving you is to awaken to the smell of fresh blooms, lilies, roses, chrysanthemums, daffodils. It is the most pleasant potpourri, lavender, jasmine, vanilla, lemon. Loving you is to lie hour after hour in rose bush, bud within bud, stalk within my petals. It is to be pricked by your thorns and yet be made simultaneously whole by its stunning, breathtaking pain. Loving you is to rejoice in meetings, however seldom. It is to know your endings from the first sentence. It is to be irrevocably your poem and song, as you are the syllables and meanings of words yet to be formed in ahead. Loving you, loving you is breathing the air you exhale. Though we be miles, hundreds of miles apart, it is communion, sacred, ritual, haloed in the innermost recesses of being, spirits. We soar beyond Earth's transient boundaries. We are the products and pledges of a time past and to come. Loving you is to slow burn, fragments and clinker. As the coalescence of my every verse, you are timeless lyric. Lyric sung one time and again by lips imprisoned to yours. Lips unable to kiss another, for you are the shadow I glean off every other. Loving you is the ultimate oxymoron, the sweet pain of surrender and climax. It is fatal recognition. No morning after pill exists for you. Loving you is panacea defying this irresistible ailment, for you are both deadly virus and elusive elixir. Loving you is to die in fragments and awaken whole. Loving you is to awaken. Thank you. So, do I still have time to read more poems? They say I should go. Somebody say I should go. Ah,
So,
ah.
sorry, we have a lot to do today. You can just buy her book. If you read everything, nobody will buy the book. So,
Please buy. This one has 72 poems. Oh, I have another collection of poems also there, and the poetry album, so you can actually hear the Loving You poem properly. Yes. And other poems. How much is what? Different things, different prices. 251515. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. So I guess now we'll take questions if you want.
Thank you so much, Ipo. So, Ipo said single does not mean you are empty. At least those of us that are actually single should use that to hold our body. I don't know if you have any questions for her. Any questions at all? Oh,
all right, who is going first?
All right. I must confess, I really love your pieces. And as a poet, I would love to ask, what is your favorite moment? Like, what gives you muse? That moment when you are, that feeling when anything you write is the perfect thing. You won't even have to cross a word. Everything is just perfect.
So I might just have to burst your bubble. I rarely ever feel like anything I write is perfect. Rarely ever. Um, so take for instance the Loving You poem you all enjoyed so much. It was written in acknowledgement of a love I had experienced. Uh, I didn't even think it was good enough. I loved the way I felt capturing that essence because the love was beyond just romance, right? I loved the way I felt, but I didn't think it was good enough. Weeks after, months after, I would go back to it and say, no, 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 no. Too many words here. Because for me, poetry is a game of economy of words. Yeah. So I'd always keep working on it. But I think that the favorite moments I would have in relation to my writing is when I read it to an audience and people connect with it, comment about it. Or like I could see people snapping their fingers, because there's something that has touched them. I mean, even if it's a story I read to people and they laugh or they are shocked, right? Then I know that I have done some good work as a writer because the writing it really is nothing until it has, been communicated to the reader. In the festival announcement, there was something that was said that the story is not complete until it has been shared with somebody. So that's an Ibibio saying, "Mbori kwereke, awon fenemi kopo." Yes, so this is it. So when I share my work and then it touches somebody, or somebody walks up to me and says, "Thank you for that." So the girl conditioning poem, the first time I read it in public, I was so afraid because I felt strongly like I needed to write that piece, but I didn't know if I had used the right words or if it would convey the message I was feeling so heavily in my heart. Then at the end of that performance, I went to the bathroom in that venue, and a lady who had been in the front, I had seen the way her eyes were glazing over, how she at some point she would shake her head and, but then she came up to me and actually in tears and thanked me for writing that piece. And she told me how it is. She's the oldest of her father's daughters. All her younger sisters are married. She was almost 40 then and not married. And that reality used to make her feel like she was not good enough, like there was something wrong with her, you know. And in that moment, I just realized if I had listened to the doubt that had said, no, 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 don't perform this one, perform something else that's already known, I would have missed out on the opportunity to reach that person. So yes, for me, that's a favorite moment because that means my work has touched someone. Do you understand? Uh-huh. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, we'll just take one more question.
As a poet, do you at times have writer's block? And how do you overcome it?
As a poet, as a storyteller, I also write scripts for radio. I have block. I have writer's block a lot. Um, and it doesn't help that I'm very insecure about my writing. So to now have writer's block makes it worse for me. It can be a real mental drain. But here's what I've learned to do. I walk away from that thing I'm writing, do something else. Something else could be watch a movie. Something else could be go hang out with friends. Go, you know, anything else apart from the writing, then come back to it. So when I'm outside, I'm seeing things with the writer's eyes. So it could just be that I've stepped outside and something happens. I see a disagreement between two friends. And then, I have my next character for the story I'm writing or for the poem. It's just, so you take time off that thing you're doing, then open your mind. As an artist, I hope you realize that you are one of the few people who sees things beyond the mundane. So I was part of a Twitter space yesterday for the NLNG Prize, the Nigeria Research Prize nominees. We had a reading and conversation on Twitter yesterday. Somebody came up and one of us read a poem titled about Seychelles. And I mean, you're listening to him talk about this island, this country that people go to on holiday. Somebody who was moderating said, I'm sure thousands of people go to this country every time and they don't see the things you have seen. So as an artist, as a creative person, you see beyond the mundane. You need to believe yourself. Trust that you have that thing inside you. It's just a momentary block. So that when you take a few hours, days, weeks away from the project you are writing or you're trying to write, allow yourself experience life anew so that you can tap into that thing you're experiencing and bring out poetry. That's the second thing, right? The other thing is that look for prompts. Prompts work wonders. I don't know, how many of you know about writing prompts? So even if you Google writing prompts, there are different kinds of prompts, whether it's for poetry or for a story or for a novel. So it's possible to get a prompt. You want to write a novel, you don't have the discipline, you can get a set of prompts. You get prompts every day for like 30 days, 60 days. It just helps you to open up your mind, Try and do that. And you get back to it. Another thing you could do is read a book. Read a book and realize, oh, this is so good. I can do this. I have this idea. I can do this. In fact, you can even read a bad book and remind yourself, I'm not this bad. Haba. I can do better than this. I will write my work.
Thank you so much, Ikwo. Thank you so much, Roland. That's actually all for this section. Please, you can actually get your book at the festival booth outside. Thank you very much. We're moving on to the next session. Please put your hands together once again for Ikwo and Roland.
Okay, because of time, we'll continue immediately. Usually you're supposed to meet them outside, but we'll continue immediately. Their books are outside. You can get them. They are very, very affordable. All right. I'll be your moderator for this session, and Okay, so I'll be introducing Sarah Etta. All right, Sarah is a writer and a poetry enthusiast who is passionate about African and feminist literature. She currently lives in Calabar, Cross River State, and works as an in-house writer for Document Women. Please put your hands together for Sarah, as she'll be our moderator for the next session. Mr. Lawrence, are you around?
Hello, everyone. Hi. Say hi back now. Hello. Oh, it's so real to be here. The last time I was here, I came here to write my jam. That was like 7 years ago. It's nice to be here doing something else. So welcome once again to the maiden edition of the Ibom Art and Book Festival. Thank you all for coming. My name is Sarah Etta, and I'm going to be the moderator for the main panel one discussion for today. So I'm not going to be alone. We're going to have some very distinguished guests that are going to be joining me today for the discussion. Some of them are going to be live here on the stage, I think, and the rest of them are going to be joining us online. Okay. Okay, so the subject matter for our discussion today is advocacy and literature, exploring mainstream paths for underrepresented voices. Advocacy and literature, exploring mainstream paths for underrepresented voices. Before we go into the subject proper, I don't know if the guests are ready. They are ready. Okay, so I'm going to be introducing our guests. None of them is coming on stage. Everyone's online. Oh, okay, wow. Okay, so they said only Kiki Modi is available. So I'm just going to introduce. I was going to initially introduce all of them, or maybe I could introduce all of them, and when they come, that's
Some of them are here. Just go ahead and introduce.
all right. So we're going to introduce the keynote speakers. Okay, so the first keynote speaker I'm going to be introducing today is an author from Edo State, South Nigeria. His written works are centered around societal values, traditional cultures, and advocacy. He's the author of Sundry Poem with Virtuous Principles, published in 2012. What is Left of What is Right, published in 2016. Worry No Dey Carry Last, published in 2019, and is one of the strongest literary voices emerging from the South. Please put your hands together for Idede Osayande. Please keep clapping until he gets here. Thank you. For 25 years and has anchored on numerous distinguished stations and radio shows. She has also scripted and produced documentaries for big shot clients, including the United Nations Development Program. amongst others. So she's going to be joining us online. Please, can you put your hands together for Joanne Joseph? She's joining us all the way from South Africa. I don't know if she's online right now.
She's online.
Okay. Welcome, Joanne. Thank you for joining us. Okay.
Hi everyone.
Okay, so
Hi
I'm going to be
Kiki.
introducing Joan
Hi.
Joseph again. She's joining us all the way from South Africa. Joan Joseph is a South African best-selling author of Drug Mule, 16 Years in a Thai Prison, and recently in May, a historical fiction novel, Children of Sugar Cane. She's a freelance TV and radio broadcaster with an immersive media presence for 25 years and has anchored in numerous distinguished stations and radio shows. She has also scripted and produced documentaries for big shot clients, including the United Nations Development Program, amongst others. Please, can you put your hands together again for her? Okay, so the last speaker for today is an Emmy nominated investigative journalist. She's the face of BBC's Sex for Great documentary, a filmmaker and media entrepreneur, the founder of Document Women, a digital media platform dedicated to battling the erasure of women, and a founding member of the infamous feminist coalition, fondly known as FEMCO. Please, can you put your hands together for Kiki Modi? Thank you, Joanna and Kiki, for joining us. Okay, so the last speaker that was supposed to join us, I don't think he's able to make it. So we're just going to have these three speakers today. So thank you all. So let's get into it. Like I said, the subject matter for today is advocacy and literature, exploring mainstream paths for underrepresented voices. Now, before we go into the subject matter, I would like to read the premise of the entire discussion so that we have something to build on. Okay, please, Kiki and Joanne, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Joanne, can you hear us?
Sarah, I can hear you not terribly well, but I'll do my best to listen hard.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so I said before we go into the subject matter, I would like to read the premise for our discussion so that we have a foundation to build the discussion on. Okay. A story is incomplete unless someone hears it. But the challenge isn't always about the story in form, but more about the multiple complex barriers hindering the story from reaching the right audience or acquiring the required justice. In literature, there are agencies and gatekeepers that determine whose voice we listen to, and in advocacy, oftentimes we discover that the one with the story is unable to tell it due to language and educational barriers, etc. So, our question today is, what is the way out for underrepresented voices and stories? And from the premise, we can see that the major aim for this discussion today is to find the way out for underrepresented voices to, have their displeasures heard better and reach the audience that they want to reach. But before solutions are met for any problems in life, we always have to, first acknowledge the source of the problem. We have to know the cause of the problem. So before we, make our speculations on what is the way forward for underrepresented voices, before we can figure out whether following mainstream paths is the way out for them, we have to first acknowledge that there are barriers that are, hindering them in the first place. And in acknowledging that these barriers exist, we also have to acknowledge that these barriers present themselves differently for different demographics of people. I don't know if you understand what I mean. So, like, if we look at the gender demographic, you see that the barriers present themselves differently for men and women. If you're looking at the race demographic, you know that the barriers present themselves differently for white people, black people, and other people of color. So, with this in mind, I'm going to. Okay, first of all, we have like about 45 minutes for this session. So, for every question, each speaker gets like 5 minutes to speak. Kiki and John, can you still hear me? Okay, Kiki, can you
Yes,
hear me?
yes, thank you.
All right. So I said for each question, each speaker has 5 minutes, so we can keep to time.
Okay.
Okay. So the first question I have goes to all three speakers. We're going to start with Idede since he's here. Okay, so my first question for all three of you is, what is your... Sorry, please, can we get a mic for him? So my first question is, what is your general opinion on advocacy and literature and the impact of this coalition? So we're going to start with Idede first.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Advocacy is part of man, and because there will always be imbalance, there will always be need for advocacy. Where does literature comes in? Everyone uses his tool to do advocacy. For example, late Fela of blessed memory was a very strong advocate using music as an avenue. So where literature comes in is this. Literature has a way of running a protest without having direct confrontation with the people. Like, for example, last month we were at a training organized by International Labour Organization on unfair recruitment, and one of the sections, the man made a very typical example. He said they went to a place and then they dramatized the challenge that was there. What was this challenge? In this particular park, we know parks in Nigeria, they always take turns to load their buses and all that. So, but the chairman of this park always have priority. And so his boss or his vehicle is always the first. Anytime he comes, he does not stay on queue. But people have been living with it. They don't see it as an oppression. But by the time these dramatists just came there and then they dramatized what has been happening there and the oppression, maybe the drama ended, protest started. And that was what brought an end to that scheme in that park. So literature has a way of creating a protest. People will be enjoying it. And then by the time they enjoy it, you'll not be as if you are confronted. They look at Fela, for example. He sings, we dance to it, and then we get the message. And then we start to say, oh, this is true, this is true. It creates that awareness in us, and the voices increases, and then the change will come.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Idede, for that. So we're going to go to Joanne. Can you hear us? Hi. So we want to know your general opinion on advocacy and literature and the impact of this coalition between advocacy and literature.
Sarah, because it's not terribly clear, I'm going to, I think I have a good idea of what you've asked, and I'm going to try to answer it as best I can. And perhaps I'll try to answer it in the context of South Africa, which is where I'm from. There are a number of barriers to literacy in general. The poor state of education in this country, lack of access to books, the inability of many of our children to read with understanding, and government's lack of inclination to actually design the education system in a way that is of real benefit to our young people. And so we have ended up with a generation of young people who have not been able to access literacy and who are largely unemployed. Books are the last thing on the minds of many South Africans right now. That in itself is a barrier. Our current socio-economic situation, a huge amount of corruption that has robbed a lot of our young people, but all South African people of many different ages, particularly the black majority in our country of decent access to education and resources. And so to bring books into the mainstream and to give people the sense that books are central to how they rise out of poverty is the first barrier that we face as South Africans. Education in this country is a luxury for many right now, and a decent education is only accessible to a small part of the population that can access the really good public schools in the system and the very expensive private schools which only the affluent can really afford. So that is our first barrier, but that creates all sorts of other barriers. We have a problem with our model as well in terms of the way books are sold commercially in the country. So the model is, unlike a country like India, for example, where you've got a large population of readers who are able to afford books because they're slightly cheaper and therefore it becomes a kind of numbers game. Here the model is quite different. You've got a very small population of readers who buy commercial books and the price of those books is extremely high. So as a result, you immediately have a barrier to the access of books in the country. And of course, there's a great deal of interest in all sorts of stories, but we have a very strange setup in South Africa. In that, when I looked at your topic, I thought, wow, I'm going to have to present the contradiction in my country, because on the one hand, we have a black majority in this country, but due to apartheid rule and due to colonization which preceded it, we do not effectively have a means to get the stories of black people out en masse into the public domain. And so we may have the conversation about minority stories, and that is a very valid conversation, which I can expand on a little bit more, being a member of a minority group in South Africa from a racial point of view. But we're still struggling to get the story of our black majority out. And there are all sorts of permutations of those stories. They are very nuanced stories. They are numerous. They are extremely heterogeneous in their or they should be in their execution, because the lives of people in South Africa are so very different, depending on class, race, gender, religion, and so forth. And we have not been able to get a critical mass of those stories into our market. It's really, really difficult for black South Africans who are writing, or black Africans even, who are writing from the rest of the continent, to get their books into South African bookstores. The largest retailer on the continent has not, sadly, made it its mission to integrate these stories effectively into the learnings of our society, into the kind of the cultural injection that needs to be made in order for us to take pride in our stories in South Africa. And as a result, we're left with a situation where it's not only the minority, but it's the majority stories as well that also cannot be accessed. So in South Africa, we face a kind of double dilemma.
All right. Thank you so much, Joanne. I think based on what she says, actually, backs up what I had said earlier, that these barriers, they present themselves differently for different people. Like she said, in South Africa, they are all South Africans, but the black South Africans find it harder to tell their stories. And do you think in a country like Nigeria, where we are all black, something like that won't happen? But there are still people who are seen as the minority in Nigeria, and they also find it hard to tell their stories. So yeah, it's just a thing that applies everywhere. Okay, so Kiki, how about you? What's your general opinion on advocacy and literature and the impact of the coalition?
I think that largely literature has elements of advocacy, and this is not to put pressure on people who just simply want to tell stories. But literature does something. It simplifies really complex ideas and stories, and it amplifies, which is the more important aspect. And so a thing that we known amongst many of us as an open secret, but it takes a writer or a journalist or a filmmaker to put it together, in a simply told story and broadcast it out there for it to have double the impact that it's been having, over the years. And that is very important. That just places a high bounty on, that just places a high bounty on how stories should be told. And I think that there should be a level of duty of care in the way that we tell our stories when we appoint ourselves storytellers in different ways as authors or journalists or filmmakers. I think we owe the people consuming our story some level of duty, of care in how we tell the story, and that is largely advocacy. For a country like Nigeria, the thing that I've personally experienced definitely is the gender angle. When it comes to women's stories being told and women telling the stories, it's like I'm a woman that wants to document women, and I'm going to face double barriers from being the woman telling the story and from people not wanting to consume media about women, or wanting to consume it as a side column as opposed to the mainstream media consumption. And so what I have noticed over I started Document Women a year ago because I felt like there are not enough women in leadership, but there are women, and we just lump these other women as women leaders, and we don't necessarily learn about them. They're just erased. We don't hear their stories, their struggles. They're just pushed to the back burner, and so that inspired me to found Document Women. And what I have noticed is, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is skepticism. I speak to journalists a lot and I say, whatever you do, please quote women, right? And in a country like Nigeria, the first feedback always, like clockwork, and anytime a journalist tells me, I tell them, you're not the first person telling me this. The first feedback is women don't like to talk to us. And you know what? It's true. It's factual that women don't like to talk to journalists. I'm a woman, I'm a journalist, and I don't like to talk to my fellow journalists because I don't believe they have my best interest at heart, right? There's many instances, if we start listening, I'm not going to leave here. The richest woman in Nigeria was interviewed for a 2-page spread of a newspaper, and the headline the journalist deemed fit to bring out of that interview was, I still cook for my husband. The richest woman. There was a lot of economic value that we could have learned from her. There is a lot, even in her personal life. But the most important thing that journalist deemed fit to bring out of that headline was, I still cook for my husband. It's the same thing. This happened to a personal friend of mine. She told her story and she gave up herself to tell a story on how she was sexually assaulted. The next time she was in the news for something unrelated, she was called rape victim. Like, that was her name. Her name was, her name was not in that news headline, and she was now referred to as rape victim. And so it's just this culture of just a complete disregard and utter unkindness towards women that we suffer in Nigeria. And the disparity is so huge. If you do a survey, I don't have the exact figure, but if you do a survey on newspapers, the number of times the word he has been used. I'm sorry, I don't have the specific figure and I don't want to quote figures, but I promise you, we're looking at 70% male-dominated stories as opposed to 30% women-dominated stories. And it's unclear how we got here, because our history is very rich with a lot of women who contributed that quota to society. And I think that we can all trace it back to erasure. When I tell people in tech, women in tech, that some of the first women coders, some of the first coders were women. Most of the first coders were women. They're like shocked. How do you not know this is your field, right? And so women think that it's hard to get into tech, well, because we naturally are not inclined to tech. How about the women who were literally called computers, who did the permutations that sent the first man in space, right? Were they not inclined? Like, at the time, that was a lower, that job was looked down on a little less, and then it felt like a woman's job. But now that it has great repute in society, it's no longer a woman's job. We now hear things like women are just not interested in coding. So yes, so this is the dilemma that I've faced in documenting women. I infuse advocacy in whatever literature that we're putting out, in whatever stories that we're telling, because it's a fight for our lives. It's a fight for the preservation of our history, and it's a fight for the future generation, because I can see how we've been robbed of a lot of inspiration from the women before us, and I'm hoping that that doesn't happen for the next generation.
Thank you so much, Kiki. Please, can we give them a round of applause? Just to add to what she said about how women are raised, how women's achievements are raised a lot in Nigeria. For the longest time, like from primary school, the only thing you'd hear about Fumi Layo Kuti was that she was the first woman to drive a car in Nigeria. But then you grow up, or I grew up, and then I found out that she was a lot more than that. She did so much social justice work. She did so much more than being the first woman to drive a car in Nigeria. And if you look into the history of so many Nigerian women, it's almost the same thing. So I think we need to do better, and that's why we have discussions like this, so that everybody can go home and in your own little corner of the world, you do what you can to make the situation better. Okay, so my next question is still a general question for all the speakers. So on exploring mainstream paths for underrepresented voices, do we think it's the way to go? Because personally, like my personal opinion is, if we keep following if we keep following the mainstream paths, it feels like we're still playing into the rule book of the gatekeepers and the agencies that are, keeping out these underrepresented voices in the first place. That is my personal opinion. But what do you three of you think? Do you think exploring mainstream paths is the way to go for underrepresented voices, or do you think there should be a standard path that gives everybody an equal chance to have their voices heard? So Idide, we'll start with you.
All right, let me use my personal examples. Internet has made it very simple. The world is changing, so we must always try to utilize every opportunity. For example, I studied engineering, and when I wanted to go into literature, there is always that was not what you studied, what do you know about literature and all that. So I used the internet. I write my poem. My first two books were actually poetry collection. I write my poem, I share it on the internet. Then some of those gatekeepers in quotes, at first they will come hard. This thing is bad, this thing is bad, you did not get this right. I just know life is a continuous schooling. So each time they criticize it, I don't allow it to get back at me. Moreover, I was even doing it as an hobby. So what's there for me to lose? I go there and check what they were talking about. Started training myself, and to cut the long story short, I published the first one, published the second one. But the truth is, they are still there. They don't give up. When I finally got an approval for my first novel, Were We Not the Carry Last, the gatekeepers came again. Were We Not the Carry Last is a pidgin English book. It's not a pidgin English. They've never seen the book. It's a pidgin English book. That was the first battle. The other one is a minority. Is it not just this? Is it to be a small story? How can you be bringing that? Because I was actually pushing it for the national stage. How can you be bringing a small book that is talking about worry? The person never read the book. So they are just looking for different instance to crash it. And then after he finally survived all the criticism, the next thing again, they came and they said, he studied engineering. How can an engineer be writing book for us literature students? That it does not just add up. So you see that the question now is, have you checked the competence? Have you checked it? Does it carry, is the story legit? Is it standard? That's not even they don't even consider, they are not even considering that at all. So you will continue to face those challenges. Just like Kiki said, you interview somebody, then the next thing is I still cook for my husband. So you just need to overlook those things and keep increasing your voice. And then we that are the underrepresented, we should learn to encourage ourselves. That's why I was so happy when they reached out for me for this festival. So even when they were sending me all the hurdles that there are challenges and all that, I said no problem. Even if I have to transport myself and pay for the hotel, I will come. Because we need to celebrate ourselves. If they, just as they say, until the story of the hunter, we always favor the hunter until the animals learn to write their own stories. So these underrepresented voices, we must learn to come together defend ourselves. Sadly enough, going back again to Kiki's story, the women folks, they are still the major problem to themselves. If you write a woman's story today and then you try to exhort the woman, go back to that page online. People that will still attack you the most and say, she's not respectful, she's this and that. Take census. They are still the one that will still do the attacking. So what we need to do is that if we need to keep working on ourselves, the underrepresented and the voices that we are trying to, we just need to re-echo our challenges and keep telling our stories until we get to that stage. Thank you.
Okay, so do you think we need to, like, it has to be mainstream parts that we have to take, like we underrepresented voices?
Okay. We don't necessarily need to take the mainstream part. Just as I said, I used the internet. But you can't have that voice. For example, I was still in that little corner in Edo State until JUPEP approved what we know the carry last. That's when somebody in Abuja will not call you and say, you wrote so and so book. Somebody in Abia will not call you and say, you know so, and I've been writing for the past 5 years. They never know you existed. So we must keep fighting until we get that stage. So there is no way you can completely say, those gatekeepers are not necessary. They are still the gatekeepers. So we must just need to find a way until we get to that stage and build influence among the gatekeepers.
Yeah, I like what you said about we, the minorities, encouraging ourselves, like we from the South especially, and women encouraging themselves as well. Although that one, just like there's so many underlying issues to why that happens, but I digress. So, Joanne, we're going to go to you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Sarah.
Can you hear my question? Yeah, okay.
So do you want me to answer your last question about mainstreaming literature? Yes. So that's, my book was a bit of an experiment when it came to that issue, because my book is about my ancestors, and particularly my great-grandmother. It was inspired by her story, and it's the story that not many people know. Neither people in Britain, nor India, nor in South Africa, all of which are linked to the story of indenture. And essentially, it's about the backdrop to it is the arrival of just over 152,000 Indians transported to the British colony of Port Natal, which is sort of Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, and how they worked there in the British industries, largely the sugarcane plantations, the Natal government railways, and so forth. And it was a time of incredible human rights atrocities. It is barely given a mention in our school syllabus. It is glossed over. Many people just do not know it happened. They're aware that the largest population of people of Indian descent outside of India lives in Durban, but most people have no idea how they got there, and nobody asks how that happened. So I have built my story, and this is just for your information what the book looks like, Children of Sugarcane, which depicts an indentured laborer carrying sugarcane. My story was essentially built on the foundation of a very, very small canon of literature written by people of Indian descent in this country who really struggled to inject those stories into the public domain and into the mainstream. They were simply not able to do it. And some of them were fairly well recognized figures, but they were all writing in disparate places, and they were writing part-time as amateur writers. So they were given very little attention. Most of them self-published the books. They did extremely small print runs. Those books traveled a little bit within the South African Indian community. And that was it. They never made it outside of that. And those stories have sort of been swept under the carpet. They've been forgotten. And there was barely any attention that they received. And so for a very long time, the dilemma that people of Indian descent in South Africa have faced is the question of, when did we actually become South African? Are we still considered foreigners in the very derogatory way that the word is used in South Africa, in a very kind of xenophobic way? When did we become integrated into the population, and since when have we been South Africans? And I think That question was what the literature buffs and the academics were grappling with for a very long time. They were saying, well, are these actually South African stories or are these Indian stories? But this is a conversation that's being had 4 generations on. And you've had people of Indian descent living in this country as South Africans and Africans for over 160 years. And that dilemma has to date still not been completely resolved. So what I did was my experiment is relatively well known in South Africa, and who holds quite a high journalism profile. Because I've done a lot of television for the last 25 years. I've done radio. I've written a lot, and so what I tried to do was use my profile to inject knowledge of the subject, particularly from the perspective of a woman, a young indentured woman, into the public domain. And amazing happened. All of a sudden, there was a realization among people of all races across South Africa that this book was talking or alluding to a notion of shared history. You had African people, and you had white people, and you had mixed race people. And then you had the Indian community themselves, who, due to the shame or intergenerational trauma, knew nothing about the story themselves. And you had all of these people sitting up and saying, why have I not heard of this before? Why did no one tell me? Why wasn't I not taught about this at school? And that was the only lever that I had to bring this narrative into the public domain. The fact that I was known to people, and it was the generosity of my colleagues in the media who then disseminated information about my book, conducted a number of interviews with me in print and broadcast media, on digital and so forth. And that was how we got the story out. And for the first time after 160 years, I think the scale of the knowledge of indenture has grown due to a couple of things. The effectiveness of my publishers in bringing their marketing machinery. And the interesting thing is they are a very traditional publishing house in this country. One wouldn't have entirely expected them to take on a book like this, but there was a willingness to do that. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But it was about time. We've been having the decolonization argument and debate for a number of years in South Africa now. It has evolved over the last 10 years. And it's about time we knew. When we talk about colonization or decolonization, do we actually know what we're talking about? Do we know what happened to our ancestors? This is the question that the book partially answers. And I think that is what has grabbed South Africans of all backgrounds, that we didn't know. We're now able to kind of start to put our finger on what happened to our ancestors, the intergenerational trauma that we suffer, both as the descendants of people who were subjugated during colonization, as well as those whose ancestors subjugated our ancestors. And so, injecting it into the public domain was one of the main intentions of this exercise for me. And thankfully, we succeeded. And I hope that it's opened the door for more such books that talk about our history, that talk about the hidden histories, that address the historical amnesia that we are suffering in many African countries right now, where we are not talking about our history. And I think we do. We've just got to make that push. And Kiki, I think people like you are in a particularly good position. Difficult though it will be, no doubt, I acknowledge that. But I think as voices in the media, that's where part of the power has to lie. You've got to have our advocates in the media who are saying, where are the stories? Bring the stories. Bring the stories that nobody's ever heard of, that nobody's ever wanted to explore, that nobody wants to talk about because of shame and tragedy and trauma and all the things that haunt us after all these generations. And let us, as members of the media, and others, writers and so forth, let's work together and let's push these stories out into the public domain. Let us make sure that everybody who reads and everybody who talks about books and everybody who loves books and who's interested in history and various aspects of culture and so forth, let us give them what they need in order to know themselves and in order to know the history of their people and their country.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Okay, so Kiki, please briefly, what do you have to say to that particular question? Kiki. Okay. Okay. Okay, I think if you have any questions, we can take them. Yes, I think we lost her. Okay. Okay, so do we have any questions while we? Okay, Kiki, are
So
you back?
sorry. Yes, I am. I'm not sure what I clicked and I just
Oh,
panicked. The whole
sorry.
screen.
Okay, so
Okay.
please briefly, because we're out of time, what do you have to say about the whole exploring mainstream parts for underrepresented voices? Is it the way to go and all of that?
I mean, not to sound cliche, but there is no clear path to this. I do see the appeal of mainstream. It's an already existing structure that has stood the test of time. I mean, the foundation is quite faulty because the mainstream is built on favoring the highest members of society's class, be it by economic status, by gender, sexuality, etc. Um, right. So, as underrepresented communities, we have a role to play. And I say we because sometimes I'm a part of underrepresented communities, other times I'm not. So one thing you need to do is also recognize your privilege. So yes, we have a lot of work to do, especially when we've been given a spot right at the top of the ladder, and we need to make sure that we need to send the ladder back down for more people. But in we need to also address like mainstream media. What they have is reach, what they have is the range, what they have is scale. And if we're being realistic, if it's a race against time, we might just have to attach ourselves to that. And so there shouldn't be a reason, ideally, for me to create document women. Media should already be documenting women, right? So on the one hand, while we're doing our advocacies, our advocating to the public, I think we can also advocate to our fellow media bigwigs to incorporate the advocacy that we do as as mainstream as well. So I know that right now it's mainstream media in Nigeria is really what's the respectable way to describe it? I think people have come to terms with the fact that it is what it is. But I'm saying it doesn't have to be that. Um, at first, the first time Tom Okewale Shunaya started a women radio station, people were like, that sounds like an NGO. That's not a profitable venture. But she's been at it for years, I think 5 years now. And it's a profitable radio station, just like any other radio station. And I think that the fear that big media have is that they already know the ways that they make money, and these ways that are not appealing might not be profitable for them. I cannot promise that it will be as profitable as what they are right now, but I know that on the long run they will cement themselves, in history as the most inclusive, as the people that told all sides of the stories. When it comes to story, that's such a currency that you cannot underestimate. Telling stories is such a currency that will always pay off. Like there is no downside on the long run to telling stories of underrepresented communities. So it's not a bad thing to look at for people who want to go to attach themselves to, mainstream media. But I also say that you shouldn't look at that as your only path to success in telling these stories. The way internet has, changed everything, like the game has changed. Like normally I mean, I'm not talking down on our national television authority, but ideally, if we wanted to know what was going on in the world, we had to wait till 9 o'clock to find out what was going on. But right now, all I have to do is log into Twitter and I'll know what's going on. Right? Of course, still, Twitter is still filled with fake news and there's a little bit of filtering to be done. But that's just an insight into how things have changed and things can be bent and things can be twisted and things can be done at our own pace now. And we have NTA now adapting to Twitter. So again, there is no hard and fast rule. We could go the mainstream route because the reality is mainstream has the scale. But then again, you can also build skill with a new foundation, which is the foundation that doesn't bend to any role. And that's still very relevant.
Thank you so much. Please, can we put our hands together for the speakers? Thank you. So I had some personal questions for each of you, but we don't have any time. So are we still going to take questions? Okay, so if you have any questions for the speakers.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, sir, let him give you the mic.
I hope I'm going to ask a question for all of you. The first is that piggybacking on Kiki's last comment. Is it Kiki? Okay, Kiki Morty. And she said we got to build new foundations. We have to build new foundations given the fact that the main media does not or willingly incorporate all of the elements of minority. Again, I used to be a professor at the university. I hate the word minority. So we would have to define who a minority is, because white, black, pink, red, or blue, or whatever color you got, you have 9 months in the belly for everybody. So no one came in as a minority. Minority is a nomenclature, is a language that is used just to put us aside. But that being said, go back to the idea of inventing a new foundation. In a place like Nigeria and also South Africa, where the minority in South Africa still rules, they control the economy, and a minority Hausa Fulani, I'm saying that in public, I want them to catch me and lock me up if they can. I want them, they are minorities in Nigeria. If you look at the population of this country, Hausas and Fulanis are minorities. The Hausas are minorities or majorities, but they are being sat down and killed by the Fulanis now. So how do you build the new foundations when major Nigerian news broadcasting outlets are being controlled by the federal government, and then a person like Abiola, who started the Concord and all the others, have been eliminated one way or the other? How do you control the foundations when the medias are still being controlled by the few who rule the
country? Okay, so okay, maybe since you referenced Kiki's comments, so maybe Kiki can answer it because of time. Okay. Kiki, can you hear us?
All right. Barely here, but the question, I guess he says, how do we control the foundation when the foundation is led by the government or is controlled by the government? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure the call to action was to control the foundation of already existing structures. That would be super difficult to pull through. You can control the narrative of the structure that you want to build for the future. You have, like, this is the foundation bit for you, and you can start building on that foundation right now. As regards the government controlling the media, it's a very, especially in Nigeria, it's not entirely the government controls NBC, and that aspect of the media. But there is just this other media where, of course, not everyone consumes. Upwardly mobile people consume independent media. Should I start naming names? No, I shouldn't. But this independent newspapers where you don't even know where their office is because everything is digital now and all the journalists are working remote. The government doesn't control those ones, and the government tries to because there's been intimidation. I know that the office of People's Gazette was raided recently, and even international organizations like the BBC have faced sanctions from government and the information minister for investigations. So this is the government's attempt, I would say, attempt at controlling the media. But also still see a failed attempt because the stories keep coming out. We still hear the stories. So I mean, it's not journalists' jobs to be resilient and to endure harassment from the government. Certainly not. But I do admire the resilience that I have experienced in this generation of journalists. So that is one kudos to them. We can't control that. What we can do is control the people in governments. We have to vote in more empathetic people. And we have to realize the importance of press. When I tell people a government that exhibits a lack of press freedom is oppressive by design. Like press is the one thing, the one conduit that connects us to freedom of every other kind of expression. So once a government starts moving oppressive towards journalists, that's a red flag for every other thing. For economy, for gender equality, for any kind of is already a red flag, because how else would you learn about all of these oppressions by the government if not from the media? So there is no society that thrives on a lack of free media. That's all I can say. You can't control the foundation that already exists. What you can do is control how your vote, contributes to this. Are you contributing by voting in a dictator because they have promised your ethnic group choice offices when they get into power? Do you believe that it's turn by turn leadership in Nigeria? Do you believe that it's tribe by tribe leadership in Nigeria? Are you voting for competence or emotional intelligence? I think that's the only power, but the major power that we have as citizens, and as journalists as well. For a very long time, as a journalist, I didn't vote because I was told that, well, you can't, your duty, your duty with politics, clashes. But the truth is, we have a higher stake in who we put in. Even as a journalist, I know that I don't want to put in a dictator. So why should I throw away my vote in the name of a journalist should not have opinions? Or I don't buy that anymore. And I'm actively, in fact, advocating for more involvement in politics. Get out, get your PVC, go and vote in a person that would give you the freedom of expression. So yeah.
Thank you, Kiki, for that. And just a side comment. He said he doesn't like the word minority because nobody comes out of the womb in
But there's
minority.
nothing I can do about that. I did not create the word. I do understand that. It's
Yeah,
an
and
unfortunate. No one
also,
likes to be
yeah, we
referred
know
to
that
as
nobody
terrorist.
comes out of the womb in minority, but the social structures that you come out and meet is what makes you a minority, or not makes you, but it's like what pushes you into that. Like when you see, um, let's use the literary world for example. When you see these mainstream parts, picking on stories from only a certain group of people, you have become a minority. It's not by your doing it, but you just have been. So it's like a social construct kind of thing. And it's not that, you're making yourself a minority kind of. So that's my own side comments. But thank you so much. Thank you so much, the speakers, for joining us today. Thank you for taking out time from your day to join. Thank all of you for also sitting through this. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Icon team for giving us this opportunity. So we've come to the end of this. Please give all of us a round of applause. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We okay. We'll be having the next panel shortly to talk about how not to write about minority. I hope nobody's having any issue with the word minority again. All right. So I think Lawrence in 10. please join me, please. Okay, we'll go on a 5 minutes break and be back here. Thank you very much. You've been an awesome audience. Thank you.
I wake up, I see you as you leave. I feel it, I see it as you leave. When we kiss, I went deep, but you're far away. Pipante, bobi bancho, fibisile. Pipante, bujobaro, fibisile. You used to be my everything. Treated me like I was a queen. What spell did it cast on me? Or was it a make-believe? You say, girl, never be afraid of ever, ever loving me. Those words I hung on to. Oh God, I was a fool. You became my bad habit, keeping up appearances so you could notice. The things and left the keys. That's crazy. Be back there, even sure. See me silly. Be back there, Jobaro. See me silly. Be back there.
More music on trendybeats.com. trendybeats.com.
I wake up, I see you as you leave. I feel it, I see it as you leave. When we kiss, I went deep, but you're far away. Pipante, bobi bancho, baby sile. Pipante, bojo baro, baby sile. You used to be my everything. Treated me like I was a queen. What spell did it cast on me? Or was it a make-believe? You say, girl, never be afraid of ever loving me. Those words I hung on to. Oh God, I was a fool. You became my bad habit, keeping up appearances so you could notice. The things and left the keys. That's crazy. Be back there, even sure. See me silly. Be back there, but you're barren. See me silly. Be back there. Cry
More music on trendybeats.com. trendybeats.com.
I wake up, I see you as you leave. I feel it, I see it as you leave. When we kiss, I went deep, but you're far away. Be everything, treated me like I was a queen. What spell did it cast on me? Or was it a make-believe? You say, girl, never be afraid of ever loving me. Those words I hung on to. Oh God, I was a fool. You became my bad habit, keeping up appearances so you could notice. Suddenly, picked the things and left the keys. That's crazy. Be back there, even sure. See me silly. Be back there, job and rock. See me silly.
More music on trendybeats.com.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
trendybeats.com.
Mr. Lawrence.
I wake up, I see you as you leave.
All right.
I see it as you leave. When we kiss, I went deep, but you're far away.
So you can stop the music. Thank you. All right. We'll not be wasting time. We'll just go straight to the next panel session, and our moderator for this session is no other person but Mr. Roland Watson Grant. Please put your hands together for him.
Thanks so much. So this session is, I find, an interesting one. And the first time that I realized I was being asked to moderate this session, I said to myself, oh, so Ibom Art and Book Festival wants the Jamaican guy to actually moderate a session about stereotypes. That's interesting. I think probably Jamaicans are one of the most stereotyped people on the planet, sometimes with good reason. But I think most people here are probably too young, and I'll tell you why. I think we're very stereotyped. Has anybody ever heard or seen the movie Cool Runnings? There's a show about Jamaica called Cool Runnings, and it's supposed to be talking about Jamaica having a bobsled team. Now, a bobsled team is not something you have from a country that has no snow at all. But Jamaica had a bobsled team, and this particular movie was supposed to capture, in a funny way, this historical time where Jamaica went to the Winter Olympics with a bobsled team. The bad thing is that it turned out to be very caricatured or very patronizing or very stereotypical in terms of what people think Jamaicans are. And I think that happens to Africa a lot. People assume what Africa is rather than try to investigate and realize, as Chimamanda Adichie said, that there is no one narrative about Africa. So this evening we're actually talking about how painful it can become when writers, and I know there are lots of writers here today, when writers, out of a bit of ignorance, and perhaps sometimes, we have to admit, a lot of laziness, decide that we are going to write something without actually understanding enough about the characters we're talking about. So welcome to How Not to Write About Minority Characters. And we have special guests, and I have to apologize that my other special guests, I think one of whom might be here and the others are online, that some will have to introduce themselves based on some last minute changes. But we do have Jamil Khan. Welcome, Jamil. I want to make sure that my pronunciation of Jamil is fine.
Thank you.
Okay. So Jamil is born in Cape Town. He's now based in Johannesburg. He's a researcher, he's an author, he's a columnist and poet, and his research focuses on the politics of creolization and colored identities in South Africa and the interrelationships of power in race, ethnicity, gender, identity, and sexuality. Now, that's a mouthful, but pretty much I think that it's interesting to have someone with all those intersections on an interview like this. Aaron Solomon is another of our panelists. I think that we can, I don't know if Aaron is actually present in the building. Right. But we are going to talk a little bit about those things. Now, maybe to begin, we can talk about some of the stereotypes that we have to deal with. I think I would start with Jamil. So, Paula Akpan, who was supposed to be here, but she was one of the last minute changes. She is a journalist and director of Black Queer Travel Guide, and it's interesting that people talk about homophobia in Jamaica, that Jamaica is a very homophobic society, etc. But I'm happy about one thing that that Paula Akpan said. She said that there is a narrative that feeds into the fact that once you are a person of color, then you are automatically violent, and if you are violent, then it means you're homophobic. And it's a narrative that she has worked to debunk, because she has more experience in the Caribbean to understand that there is not one narrative about homophobia. So I appreciated that. But let me ask Jamil, what are some of the mundane, basic things? You know, as writers, we think, okay, well, if a person is, you know, we all have two legs. You know, most people have two legs, etc. You know, and we make assumptions about others based on our own experience without understanding that the minority characters that we're trying to write about are actually not like us, and therefore we make mistakes. Now, some of the basic things, for example, if you believe that a person, one of your characters that you're writing about, is in a wheelchair, he's a minority, it's easy for you to make assumptions about how he gets ready for work without thinking clearly about his real experience. He doesn't just get out of bed and takes a stroll. He has to do a number of things before he can easily even walk, or easily even move to where he's going. So it's important to think about that. We also have Mr. Pius, Ekimimi Pius. Correct. Thank you. Who is here? And he's joining us on stage, right? Right. So let me get back to this. Let me just define, first of all, before I ask Jamil, let me just define what minorities are according to what our program says. So definition of minorities: a culturally, ethnically, or racially distinct group that coexists with but is subordinate to a more dominant group. When we think minority, we think of women, we think of people of color, we think of sexual and gender minorities, we think of people from minority ethnicities, we think of people with disability, people who are transgender, etc. Which means, if you're a writer, then you have many occasions to actually include these characters in your writing. You don't have to, but if you are, then it makes sense to figure out how this is going to be done. So, as a moderator, I'm being very neutral on this, but I need to make sure that we establish what minority means so that we are clear. How do you navigate? If you're a writer, story has two characters who are minorities. How do you navigate this without becoming disparaging or disrespectful, or even just completely misunderstanding them? I spoke earlier about Cool Runnings, and the issue with Cool Runnings was not that I felt that people who were writing about Jamaicans were intentionally trying to be disrespectful. However, they did, because of a bit of ignorance and a lot of laziness, write about them in a way which we found to be hilarious. I'm sure you see this all the time. So, how do you avoid that? Many times a well-meaning writer with no intention to offend will still make a blunder based on a lack of understanding or taking some things for granted. Let me start with Jamil. So I was speaking earlier, Jamil, about assumptions about who we are. Now, what are some of the mundane, basic things? I mean, you yourself are a writer. What are some of the basic things that a writer who does not identify, for example, as queer, take for granted? Any mundane, basic thing that we would not, that a writer who does not identify as another, whether it be, queer or female or with a disability, what are some of the things that we might take for granted? Jamil? All right, we're also going to be joined by Samuel Udoma, who's here as well. Can you give a round of applause to welcome him, please? Jamil, are you there? Are we hearing Jamil? We're not hearing Jamil. Okay. Well, in the meantime, let me just ask Mr. Pius Kemimi, do I have your name correct? About some things. What are some of the things that you, let me just give you that same question. What are some of the things that that we as writers might take for granted about another character? Especially when it comes on to not understanding the mundane things, very simple things. There are people who say, well, the disability, for example, of a person or a person who's physically challenged, when they think about travel, they have to think about travel in a different way than other people with, moving limbs do. What are some of the other stereotypes that you think that we can make when it comes on to making assumptions about minority characters?
Thank you. So the thing about writing and the thing about writers is that there's always a tendency to want to tell your own story so much, control the way you tell your story, ensure that you have control over all the factors that contribute to the success of the story, so much so that you miss out on several things, miss out on how the people that you're telling the story about, miss out on how they feel, miss out on the things that are very dear to them. And that's the reason why when writers, especially writers from majority cultures, want to tell stories about writers from minority cultures, most of these people from these cultures do not feel like there is enough representation, because what happened in that process was that the writer from the majority culture just wanted to tell a story. The writer from that culture did not put into consideration all the intricacies of that story, of that culture. For instance, if it was supposed to be a story about black people in America, the writer, being a white person, for instance, can just write a generic story, a story that just addresses the generic concerns of black people in America. But we must also understand that in that same America, black people have particular concerns. Black people have issues that are very particular to them, issues that affect them specifically. So at that point, it's very easy for those people to lose touch with those kind of stories, and that's the reason why most times when writers from majority cultures write these kind of stories, readers from those minority cultures do not appreciate those stories. Most times they don't want to read it. Sometimes, even though the stories are about them and about their cultures, They don't want to read it because they feel it's not, even though it's a representation, it's not an adequate representation. So representation is not just important because it's representation. It has to be representation to a certain degree. There has to be a level of adequacy. The representation has to be adequate. And herein lies the mistake, because writers from majority cultures most times think that because they are representing minority cultures, it's enough. They are bringing minority cultures. You hear some writers from majority cultures say they are bringing minority cultures to the spotlight. But it's not enough to bring stories to the spotlight.
So it's important then to actually understand. And how do you do this in a sentence? How does a person in a majority culture make sure that they're bringing the right representation?
Yeah, and I think this can basically be done by proper and thorough investigation. Okay. Investigation into these cultures. For instance, if you're writing about the Jamaican culture, you have to find out everything about that culture, everything about that story, so that you are going to tell a robust story, and you don't just represent them and give them a one-sided representation and make them lose touch with the story you're trying to tell.
Right. So thank you. And I think that's a nice segue to go to talk to Jamil about a particular passage from his book, the making of a water slam. Jamil, are you there? So, and I found this, Jamil, I should say this to you. I found a particular excerpt incredibly compassionate on your part, in the sense that apart from it being a wonderful creative plot twist in a non-fiction book, I also found, and I'm not going to give away too much, right, because that's the spoilers, I won't do that, but in essence, it was your father trying to be as understanding as was possible about your coming out, or actually not about your coming out, about you being pushed, pretty much, and how you found compassion in his response when you actually thought he would be the one who would be the ogre, or the one who would actually have the most anger involved. So the question from that is, you wrote that you literally saw him making an effort to understand. Is this? Do you think this is generally possible in writers or people in general who want to understand a person's minority? Is there? Have you seen changes over the time? I mean, you're a student as well. You're an academic as well. Do you see, let's say, compared to 10 years ago, do you see change happening? Okay, go ahead. We're hearing you now.
All right. So, yes, I was saying that the conversation around ethics when it comes to research and literature, in the sense of handling people's lives and people's experiences through text as a medium, I think that conversation has expanded over time. I think historically, especially in out of the academy itself, being quite competitive and extracting people's experiences for profit, there's been a bit of push against that, because we've also seen how that harms communities. So that there has been when it comes to ethics, of course, these changes can't happen quick enough. So I would say that it's sufficient. But I do think people are starting to if not think about how they are handling people's lives in story text, then being sort of scared about not that, which is a good thing. I think we should be a little bit afraid to simply just say, things when other people's lives are in question. And so big changes, but perhaps not enough.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jamil. And I guess I would just segue from that. I mean, you said maybe there should be a bit of fear. And I guess my question, I'm going to bring in Samuel at this point, with regard to art. Many people say, well, look, if we're talking fear and violence and particular things that writers write, isn't it just art? Isn't it, is it supposed to be taken seriously? If I stereotype a person, why can't I just write and say, well, it's art? Is there danger in it?
Well, thank you so very much. Because I'm real happy to be part of this discussion. It's a very important discussion because topic we are talking about today is a very sensitive one, considering our literary background, considering where we come from, and considering the essence of this festival, because how not to write about a majority, and I would have loved to say how not to write against a minority, sorry. Because for me, the whole concept of a writer trying to exert his story about a people that he has very little knowledge of. The whole concept of a writer, whether he's based in America, in the West, or Asia, trying to exert his story about and on a people that he has very little information about is in itself soft colonialism. It's a soft colonialism because it's a literary colonialism because you're going to form perceptions about me because I'm a minority that do not relate to my true dreams and aspiration, not just as a person, but as a cultural background. So I would have wished that I wish this hall was filled with perceived majority writers, writers who come from majority backgrounds, so that they can begin to be, they can begin to imbibe what I would call conscious sensitivity in putting out their stories. Conscious sensitivity, and not just thinking, I'm just doing this for art for art's sake, like you would say. Conscious sensitivity, especially when it concerns issues bordering on minority, issues of religion, issues of sex, issues of political history, how far we have come as a people, and then someone choosing to write on how far we have come as a people, not minding the struggles we have passed through, issues of political considerations, and so many other very sensitive issues that writers out there might pay very little attention to, or might give a very casual, exposition on, because probably they want to fit in their stories, they want to finish up their stories and put it out to the press, and probably this portrayal of minority will spice their story for their collective market gains, not probably for the sake of the upliftment of the minority. Absolutely. So these little issues are what I think writers must imbibe: conscious sensitivity when writing about minority, or not to write about minority, so that at the end of the day we don't end up having what I would call literary colonialism.
Right. Thank you for that, Samuel. And I want to talk about language, because that's what we use when we're writing. Whether you're a screenwriter or a novelist or a short story person, we use language. When you're a screenwriter, you have a little less fun. I hope there are no screenwriters here who don't like that I said that. But you have less fun because you don't get into all the description. But language is important. And Jamil, you wrote about language in your book as it concerns the heteronormative, using words like house and home, etc. And I found that to be an interesting point in terms of how society is built. But I want to talk about language in the sense of when it comes on to using
using terms that we now have become familiar with. When we talk about particular multisyllabic terms, pronouns, dead naming, misgendering, etc. I'm not assuming that you have all the responses for these, but I'd like to hear your perspective on when it comes to language, using language like that. What do you say to the person who feels that they're walking in a minefield where these terms are concerned, where the term of misgendering or dead naming? What do you say to this person who feels like, well, I can't express myself anymore because of these terms and I might say something that's incorrect? How do you speak to that as, how to use language?
So I think this important point for language is that we tend to think about as something that precedes us, like it exists dependently of us, and therefore we have no choice but to be inducted into the handling of a particular language. It gets passed on to us, and so the matter. But in fact, we make and unmake language every day. All we do that in order to construct the world around us. So of course I'm not talking you can't object into existence, for example, things exist, but the point is we have created names for them, and so we bring those things to utility, because if window was, for example, if a window was not named a window, it would simply just be no function and no purpose. So we meaning. So with regards to language around things, really that they should be afraid. Again, we have inherent particular ways of speaking and do things. We interrogate where that comes from. It's very late now. English was introduced to Africa, for example, years ago, for a political purpose. But the point is, we have to first of all fight using. I think it's submitting to a kind of defeat to say that, oh, this is too difficult for me to unlearn now, and I speak the way I speak and say the things I say, and I think everybody should just accept that. I don't think that somebody's unwillingness to unlearn ways of speaking, or somebody's attachment to ways of speaking is more important than recognizing someone else's humanity. That cannot be placed. That preference or that struggle that the person is battling with to learn a new word or to address somebody in a different way from what they are used to cannot be more important than the person or the people that this language is meant to humanize. And so I would say to a person like that, if it is important to you that your fellow people, your fellow, siblings or friends or neighbors, acquaintances, if it is important to you that people like that are humanized, then you will try. And you'll make mistakes because, like I say, we've worked with this language for a long time. So it is a task. It is a task to unlearn. It is a task to sort of change our linguistic repertoires. But it can be done. And if we believe in the humanization of our fellow human beings, then it's something worth trying for. And you'll make mistakes. And sometimes people will be upset with you Um, and sometimes they won't, sometimes they'll understand. But the point is, you can't allow that fear to put you off from even making the attempt. You'll try, and you'll try again until it becomes natural to you.
All right. Thanks, Jamil. And on the same topic of language, one of the things that any student or anybody who says, well, Roland, can you be my mentor? One of the issues that come up all the time is dialogue. Like, I don't like writing dialogue. Why am I writing dialogue? Does my story have to have dialogue? Is there anybody here who would admit that they hate writing dialogue? Anybody? There you go. So, this, on the topic of language, when it comes to dialogue, I was watching a masterclass with Amy Tan. She wrote the book. I've momentarily forgotten the title. The Joy Love Club. She's Asian and she wrote about language. Now, when it comes on to dialogue, it's very easy if you're writing an African person or if you're writing a minority. And Jamil said a while ago, there's patois and dialects all over. It's easy to be patronizing when you're writing a person's dialect or a person's accent. It's very easy to be patronizing and maybe disrespectful because it belittles them. How far do you go in trying to avoid that? And if I'm going to ask you, Pius, how far do you go in trying to avoid that? And then I'm going to ask Samuel if there are any suggestions that you have in terms of how do you do that respectfully.
Okay, so first of all, like I said earlier, everything has to do for every minority story to turn out great. Everything boils down to the level of investigation you do into the intricacies of that story. So, for instance, you are writing about Black Americans. Like, let me use the instance I used before. And then you don't know that there is a particular way Black Americans speak. So when you're writing that dialogue, you're writing the dialogue like white people, 2 or 3 white people are speaking. Yes, it's dialogue. Yes, it's communicating something, but it's lacking in local color because the what actually represents that set of people is missing. So when you take that component out, you've taken out a very crucial part of their story. Even though the dialogue is saying is trying to push their story forward, but if they pick up and that's the reason, like I said before, most people that's the reason why most people from minority cultures, when they pick up books written about them, they do not appreciate it because people that do not know them might pick up the book and be like, oh, this is a really great representation of Black Americans. But they can pick up the book and say, yeah, this is great dialogue, but we don't talk like this. We don't say this. These are the things we would say in this situation, and you are not saying them, so we've lost touch.
Good. So otherwise it's a good story, but the dialogue doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask Samuel, what are some ways that you think that you could probably represent dialogue better? I'll preface this by saying, when I was writing my first novel, I did a lot of interviews with native speakers. But that can't be the end of it, because you still miss the nuances. Like, I thought no wahala was an issue. It means no problem, right? Yeah. I missed the nuances. So how do you, what are some methods you think that you could do when it comes to literally writing dialogue that could make sure that you don't miss that cultural weight of the story that actually not only is respectful, but that broadens the story?
Thank you so much. Like I said, for minorities, minority will always be a relative term to me. I always adopt it as a relative term to me because when we say minority, the common suspect is Africans. The common suspect are the third world countries. These are the minorities. In as much as these are not minorities by geographical sizes, they are not even minorities by population. They are just minorities by perception. I don't know. You were with me, right?
Sorry. Just repeat your last sentences for me. I was.
Okay, I said, like when we talk about minority, I like to refer to the term as very relative.
Yes.
Because when we talk about minorities, the common perception is always Africa. The common perception is always third world countries. The common perception is always the poor countries. In as much as, in realities, these people are not actually minorities. Politically, they are bigger. Geographically, they are bigger. Population-wise, they are bigger. So it becomes a thing of perception. Now, for a people like this, for a minority generally, little things matter a lot. Little things are very sensitive to minority people, and it's something that can spark serious outrage. Minorities tend to bother about very little things, and it's important. Boundary, you cross our river, and so many little things. They consider this thing. Part and parcel of the little things about minority is also dialogue, which I want to infuse as language. Language, dialogue here is the mode of communication in your story. Dialogue also encapsulates the language of your work. Now, I don't know how a story, an African story, can ever be told, no matter how good the Western writer is, without a few ingredients like proverbs, African proverbs. Truly, I do not know. These are not just dialogue. This is communication. This is language in our story. And if your story can go on to win all forms of literary awards, and then at the end of the day, it lacks these nuances. It simply means you did not carry minority along in the conception of your story plot. And in that way, that shouldn't be the way to write about a minority.
Right. You missed a great opportunity to actually make the story great, not just good. I'd like to bring in Udeme Nana. I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly as well. I take lots of lessons where that is concerned, because I'm going to leave Nigeria with a lot of pronunciation perfection. So, how do we expand that? Is there any other that you could expand on what Samuel said just now in terms of how do you approach the nuances of understanding so that we have a fuller understanding of a person's culture? And I'm saying that against the background that I've always seen Nigeria and Africa in a very, I'm going to say, cosmetic way. Never mind my origins and my ancestry being here. I've seen it in a cosmetic way. We've always assumed when you were a child, because we were never taught, you always thought that Africa is a country. You never saw the nuances, and that everything is, there are people who actually have identities which are granular and different from just, oh, it's in Africa. How do you approach this when it comes to literally language and making sure that language has its place and a useful place in writing?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very interesting discussion, and I want to take it from the fact that has been expressed by someone that words are weapons.
Yes.
And like Sammy said, depending on the way you use words, you can heighten the marginalization of minorities. And so for me as a writer, and for me as someone who teaches critical writing, I like writers to look at the positives and not stereotype the so-called minorities. Don't stigmatize them negatively, because you will draw them out in a way that they won't appreciate the creative output. And so you don't stigmatize them, you don't denigrate them, you don't denigrate their culture, even the way they speak. But unfortunately, we see a lot of this in writings by people who believe they are in the majority. The politics of denigrating, of putting them down still continues, even in the literary field.
And is it that it doesn't, that to that majority, it perhaps the feeling is it doesn't matter,
because there are not enough people to say you can't do that.
Yeah, that's a feeling that it doesn't matter. Just like what happens in the political arena. Those who are putting down the minorities believe it doesn't matter. But it matters to the minorities.
Absolutely.
You need, you know, there are people. You need to reflect them as they are. You respect them. You know, they are human beings. And so you don't show them off as little beings in the universe.
Okay, thank you, Edemi. And I want to take the opportunity to say hello and thanks for joining us to all the people who are actually online listening. It's wonderful that this is being cast to many other people who themselves in their own situations have that kind of experience. I also want to make sure that our audience is not left out. So if you do have a question while we're doing this, you know, we're intermingling those questions as we go. I see a hand here before we get back to the panel. Is there a question? Well, we have two questions here. Lawrence, how do we roll with this microphone? And then we'll get back to the panel. So let's
Thank you
take
very much.
2 or 3
I
questions.
just want to be practical with what the last speaker said, to reinforce what he said.
Yes.
At times, what we writers do, myself, I fall victim of it at times. We try to go with the norm because we don't want to be seen as writing something that will not sell, or that will be as if, let's say, for example, I'm from Edo State. And when you talk about Edo State, for example, if you hear, either they tell you about, oh, they are witchcraft, or they are known for prostitution. So if you want to write about Edo State now, and you just put those in your picture, those narrative, people will just accept it and, oh, this is a very great book. It's a real picture of who they are. Then for Akwa Ibom and for Calabar, you see, you want to write your story, the servants in the house help in the house must be from those places. You see, those narratives, you are strengthening those negative narratives. So we as writers, we must learn to be bold enough to take, it might not be the popular parts. Like my recent work that will be out, God willing, by September, Edo Airways. Now, when people hear that title, Edo Airways, they'll be thinking again, I want to talk about those witchcraft and all those stuff. But it's a way to start changing the narratives with our work. That was why I was serving in this state 10 years ago, 2012. The governor then, Gozababu, is 10 time to try to change that narrative about his people. So every time there's an achiever from this state, he blows it up. So you know that, oh, we have great people in this place. It's not only house help and all those things. So we as writers, we need to take that pain to ensure if you're writing about minority, should you be a good part. And we should not cry when it affects us. Even the Fulani, for example, now, if you want to talk about killings and all that, you must have that Fulani coloration. We are not also helping the matter. As you are crying that you have been affected, you should also consider another person. So I hope I've made my point. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We're talking about a particular kind of bravery in writing as well.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the privilege of being here. Thank you for moderator and the panelists and all the contributors. My question is, the topic is how not to write about minorities. Yes. And we are going to keep saying that we play into stereotypes, we need to know the nuances and intricacies of what we're talking about. The minority story, just like, let me give an example. We're writing about Africa. We have stories of poverty in Africa. And we tend to say that's more of the story we have out there. And then we now have people trying to write about the prosperity. We have houses, we live where we have water, tap water, we live in cities, and we do well. So when we're talking about how not to write, we need to be careful. We don't move to the other side too far. We need a balance. So we don't need to move to the other side where there are no longer people that live in villages and in huts. And then move that. The story must be that the people live in the cities, they have issues, topical issues, they're facing issues of life and love. We still have the poor people. So the question is, we are trying to combat, what are we combating? Because everything is a minority now, and later can become a majority that will oppress a new minority. So how do we balance this as writers?
Yeah, I think though that it's not to eradicate
poverty, in writing, or squalor in writing, or anything that somebody would consider to be um, socially demeaning. Like I think what we're trying to preserve is the humanity. Is the humanity of the people who still exist in conditions which are less than what the majority have. So it's the humanity. I think it's the most, and I think you've given me the opportunity to really bring out that nuance. That what the most, and I think Jamil said it earlier. One of the most important things, regardless of the characters we write about, because I like writing about people who live in swamps and gullies. I like writing about that because I have the opportunity to show them, to show anybody, and I came up in humble circumstances as well, to show them the humanity that happens in that. And a part of fiction is writing about ordinary people in ordinary or less than ordinary situations doing extraordinary things. And I think that's important. And you're right, I take your point about balance, and I think that's very important as well. Udemy.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, just before, was there another hand back here? Okay, all right. Right after Udemy.
Yeah, the point I want to really emphasize from what Idede said,
yes,
is the need for accurate interpretation.
Yes.
So you capture or you put your writing in the right context. So if you are writing about the squalor, you should interpret to enable people know that these people who live in squalor are not, that they are humans, like those who live in palaces. And that if you cut their body, if you pinch them, they'll feel pains. The blood that will come out from their body is red. And so that's a need for interpretation, so that readers will not feel that you are denigrating a human being.
Thank you, Udemy.
That's the point I wanted to emphasize. Thank you.
It is about the humanity.
Good evening, and thank you so much for this very insightful session. My question is, we know that storytelling has a very vital role in vitiating existing stereotypes. So, do you think we've done enough as minority using literature as a weapon to weaken existing stereotypes? If we've not done enough, what more do you think we can do to stop or to give less power to those stereotypes? And then the second question I have is, there are sometimes stories are being told about minorities, stories that don't particularly represent us well enough. How do you think we as a minority should act? What's our role? What can we do to make sure that we are seen in different light? Or just give your insights on that. Thank you very much.
I don't think by the rules, they're wonderful questions. I don't think by the rules I'm allowed to say stuff. So I'm not allowed to speak where that's concerned. It's my panel, but I'll hand that to Samuel. I mean, I think your first question, are we doing enough? I'm going to hand that to Samuel to speak on that. Maybe in my wrap up, I can give you my own insight on that.
Okay, thank you so very much. Like I always said, I think the concept of minority is still very relative. It's still very relative. And it's a term that has been forced on a people, especially in the literary field. Because literature is about humanity. It's a far-reaching concept that we will say, oh, just this is about African story. Does it mean Africans don't do well outside and all of that? So I think we have not done that enough. But then, away from the story, the plotting, and everything about it, there are other key indices which I think we have not done enough. And these key indices affect the output of the realization of this. These key indices are, number one, I would say, maybe curriculum factor. Curriculum factor, which are purely all human, induced indices. Our story are very good. Our children outside the country reading our story. Our children are children of majority reading African minority story or reading minority stories that are good. Why are minority population always reading works from majority, authors? Why are we forced to take more of the works that come from the majority population than the works that come from the minority? Are they also taking ours? Because I know we have equally astute works that can match their works word for word, quality by quality, richness in story and richness in story. But till this present day, I don't know whether there's any school in China that is reading Chimamanda. I don't know whether there's any school in, let's say, Stratford in the UK that Chimamanda is a forced novel, is a forced text, compulsory text, the same way we read The Tempest as a compulsory text here in Akwa Ibom. Even when the realization and the stories of The Tempest do not relate anymore to our current cultural aspiration as a people, bar the good terms, the poetic sweetness that Shakespeare represents. Apart from the poetic sweetness and the finesse that Shakespeare gives, and the aura that surrounds the fact that this is a classic from Shakespeare, the story of Shakespeare holds very little to our current cultural and literary aspiration as someone from Akwa Ibom State. So I read Shakespeare for art's sake, not for my humanistic richness as a person. Children in Stratford, where Shakespeare comes from, should also be able to read Chimamanda and get to see our trajectory and our history, how we have moved as a people. And then you go on, they can also go on to see the progression of our literary culture from Achebe down to the people we are having now. Astute work. So I think we have done enough in terms of writing. We have done enough in terms of story. We have not done enough. The repertoire that is coming from Africa is massive, is heavy if our authors should bring out their works. But the human indices that affect the appreciation of this work or these works are the things we have not done enough.
I see. So we're not having enough absorption of the work that's been done. And it's an interesting point. And I want to, the point I would make on that is that while there is, as you're saying, not enough absorption of the work that's been done, there is a counterpoint that is creating perceptions for minorities. So there is no pushback. There is no balance. My brother talked about balance just now. So there is no balance. And it's one of the things I want to ask you, Jamil, when it comes on to balance. And it's a forgive me. It's a slightly layered question. It has to do with how Western media, some Western media, use the opportunity to find or to promote that people of color are violent. And one of the ways they do this is, for example, perhaps make connections between homophobia and people of color, that they are one and the same, or that they are synonymous. Is that your experience? Because in your studies with how things are related in that very layered experience that you have, is that a fair statement that Western media sometimes utilizes that to reinforce that people of color are violent?
Yeah, I think, look, I think somebody, I can't even know who it was, I was speaking to somebody and they pointed out that all media technically is propaganda because everybody has their own agenda, and it just depends on what the objective that particular sector of media wants to achieve. But I do think that when it, for example, with a topic like that, these stereotypes are described, which is also a form of violence. There's a refusal to address when we ascribe certain characteristics to certain kinds of people. There's a refusal to address the source of that behavior or that culture or that stereotype, right? So we know very well that homophobia in Africa, for example, is something that, unlike what is generally spoken about as homosexuality is a Western import to Africa, the reality is that homophobia is actually a Western import into Africa. Because when colonizers arrived on the continent and started undoing societies, one of the ways in which they did that was to criminalize what they deemed deviant sexual activity. Those forms of criminalization didn't exist before. So if an honest conversation is to be had, for example, about homophobia amongst Black people and people of color across the world, then alongside that, concurrently, the conversation about the impact of and legacy of colonialism needs to be had. And that is not a conversation that serves Western media between homophobia, colonialism, and white supremacy. So yeah, I wanted to say, the other thing that I wanted to say also was, we must also remember when we talk about we've used the word a lot, right? We talk about minorities. People are not inherently minorities. They are minoritized by social power and social structures. And of course, again, we're not talking about a numerical minority. We're talking about a social minority. But again, when having these conversations, I think it's important for us always to remember that the way in which people come to be, classified in certain ways, the ways in which certain perceptions about different kinds of people are created, has a source, and that source is a power structure. And so when we talk about people being minorities, when we write about minority experiences, there's also the opportunity to, like I said, sometimes address the fact that these are realities. We don't have to be dishonest and deny, for example, that we do partake in certain kinds of behaviors in order to protect us and save face. Because the other thing that happens with minorities in the world generally is that they are held to a standard of perfection because they are already oppressed, right? So you are oppressed, you can't put a foot wrong. And that in itself is a process of dehumanizing people. You are shackling people to perfection and thereby robbing them of the opportunity to just be human like everybody else, right? And that's why we see this exceptionalism. We see, there was a conversation today about African parents and holding their kids to unrealistic standards around education and all of these things. Right. And it's because you're trying to protect your child or yourself from the perception of an oppressor.
Right, which in itself,
mustn't
you're saying is dehumanizing because it tries to fix you to perfection, which you are not. Right, so, and it's interesting, and earlier you did say that, what are the different ways that we are dehumanized. I want to make sure, Lawrence, that if we have access to questions online, I don't know if we have access to those questions, but I just want to make sure that we give our international audience online an opportunity if we can find any questions. Okay. One of the things that, and the conversation can become very politically charged and very socially charged. One of the things I don't want to lose sight of is that we are talking about writers and how writers write. I want to share something. I'm allowed to share, see? I want to share something that Amy Tan said in her masterclass. It was that we're still on the topic of language, if you choose to write somebody in the accent, there are two things to do. One is to remember that that's how you hear it. So if you're writing about an Asian speaking or an African speaking and you're not Asian nor African, it's important one to recognize that that is how you hear it. So one is they're speaking in a way that they understand what they're saying and that others who are like them understand. But your ears is perhaps the thing that's the problem. So you're hearing it in a different way. So therefore, when you stereotype writing and you put it in writing in a disparaging way, you're actually showing that you are the one who isn't listening correctly. So her suggestion was this, and I found it a very important point, and after 10 years of writing, I never thought about it. She says, you don't have to write external monologue, external dialogue when you're talking about a person who doesn't speak like you do. What you can do is write how that person would sound if they were speaking what you consider to be standard English. So instead of making that disparaging conversation that you think is chopped or staccato, write what the person is saying on the inside. Write what that mother is saying about her child on the inside. Put that in your language so that you give the character respect and so that you actually show that this character, one, is human, has feelings like you, and three, is actually making a valid point. And I think that goes back to your point earlier as well. All right, so we have only a few minutes left. I want to put this back into the audience if there are any questions or any points that we want to make about this conversation. If not, we'll just, okay, so we'll just take this last one, and if not, then we'll. Yes.
Well, I want to say the audience. The listener or the creator has these inside thoughts that is not necessarily explicit or expressed by the reporter. And that is based on the economic component. We talk about majority, minority. The majority rider is faced with the bottom line. And in Akwa Ibom State, I'm pretty new here. I've only been here about 3 months. The thing is that I saw something in the paper 2 days ago that talked about this Nigerian, Niger something 999, whatever, who claimed not to be an video man. He distanced himself, he like denigrated the video people because he is on a national, a global television network. I don't know the specifics of the story, but I just read it. So the bottom line is that this man was acting to the scene or the economic deciders who are going to decide whether the program is on the air or not on the air. So he distanced himself from the place he comes from, which is it is an abomination for someone to deny your ancestry. Mr. Gate, you spoke earlier about Bob Marley, and I love Bob Marley. I found respect.
No, that's one of the stereotypes I will accept. I'll accept that stereotype. I listen to Bob Marley.
Okay. Hey, you can deny Bob. It's okay. The whole world accepts it. So you're a minority when it comes to that.
That's right. All right.
The point is now that it's economic factor that determines who's a majority, who's a minority.
Yes.
If a Ibom State, with all its wealth, is being told by the majority
yes.
that they are minors in Nigeria, or you can imagine what it is for me after 45 years in the United States, come back here and be a minority.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think we're out of time.
Please let me just say something to that. You know, a lot of people become victims of how they are framed.
Yes.
And I think that is exactly what that guy succumbed to. People are almost every day because
Book and Art Festival for this opportunity, and I look forward to discussions like this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. The next session, panel session, is going to be virtual. So we are not going to waste any time, and we will be looking at all right this creativity, business, shame, and fame, and yes. And our moderator for this session is no other person but Miss Kate Ekanem. Please, let's. All right. So, and on this panel, okay, help us check if Miss Kate is live now. All right, ma'am, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Good, great. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on the second day of the Ibom International Art and Book Festival. I am not supposed to be the moderator of this section, but I guess everyone is running away from it, so why not just take it upon myself? I made this happen anyway, so here we go. My name is Kate Kanem Hanum, and we have today here Zakashu Magziban and Michael Afemfia. I'm going to go ahead and read their profiles so we can get to know a little bit about them and their works in the literary space. So Michael Afemfia. By the way, welcome for joining us, Michael, and welcome Zakashu. Help me out if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I am so sorry.
It's Zekashu, yeah.
Zakashu. All right, so here we go. Michael Afemfia is a diversity, settlement, and inclusion practitioner based in Saskatchewan, Canada. He's based in Canada. Let's make that sure. He is the author of the critically acclaimed novels When the Moon Caught Fire, A Street Called Lonely, Don't Die on Wednesday, The Mechanics of Yenegua, and Rain Can Never Know. His sixth novel, Leave My Bones in Saskatchewan, which I think that's based in Canada, a novel about the immigration experience, is scheduled to release in Canada and Nigeria in the fall of 2022. Michael is a graduate of Law and Business Administration, although in the course of his career, spanning 2 decades in counting, he has acquired multidisciplinary experience working with both private and public sector organizations. Notably, between 2016 and 2019, he was a speechwriter to the governor of his home state, Bayelsa, in Nigeria, while simultaneously serving as a member of the State Library Board. About the same period, he served as Chairman, Association of Nigerian Authors, Bayelsa State Chapter. He is the host of The Global Voice, a radio show that celebrates diversity and inclusion on CFCR Radio. Welcome, Michael Afemfia. By the way, his books are out there for sales, so go ahead and grab the books after this. And then we have Zekashu Magzib, and this would really is someone I really am so excited to have here because he has a lot to contribute to this panel. He's doing something really amazing. Zekashu Magviban is a Berlin-based writer and editor and the founder of Bakwa Books and Bakwa Magazine, so he's a publisher. His fiction has appeared in Wasafiri, Kwani, Jungle Gym, and elsewhere, and his writing has been translated into Japanese, German, French, and Spanish. He is the recipient of an Academia Sloss Solitude Fellowship. I'm so sorry, guys. I probably am pronouncing everything wrong today. Welcome, Zakashi and Michael. We're so honored to have you here on our panel. So let us talk about this. it's a very tricky title. It's, I don't know, it's kind of confusing, but I hope you understood what we were trying to do with that assignment. So this creativity business, shame and fame. How about we start with Nzekashu? You have been running Bakwa magazine. I'm curious to know why. Why did you start Bakwa magazine? What motivated that decision to start something like that, even though you live in Berlin?
Yeah, so I started Bako magazine in 2011, and the reason was very simple. So, like back then, there wasn't really any literary magazine in English that could kind of like be competitive at an international scale. And so, because of this lacuna or absence, I just decided to start Bako magazine. And it was at the time where I was also reading a lot of other magazines around the world, everything from Saraba to Chimrenga to Granta. And I was like, why don't we have a similar or a literary magazine that Cameroonians can write their works in and also read works by their peers. And yeah, when I started Bako magazine, I was still living in Cameroon.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Michael, I have a lot of questions to ask you, but I'm just going to take it one at a time. But I want to start with when I remember when Mechanics of Yenegua came out, and everyone was so happy about it, and we had some pictures of mechanics in Yenegua actually taking pictures. How has that felt for you? Like, you come from Bayelsa. We haven't had a lot of literatures from Bayelsa. Not that people are not writing. I keep saying this, not that we don't have writers. Naturally, we have a lot of writers in Bayelsa, in Akwa Ibom, in Rivers, but usually there's no platform for publishing. There's no connection to those networks that can help share those stories, like what Bakwa is doing. Bakwa is trying to amplify the voices of Cameroon writers. So tell me a little bit about how that must have felt for you. Did it look like some kind of isolated journey? What was the process of stepping out with a book that everyone is still talking about up to today?
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Lawrence, can you confirm if everyone can hear? Can everyone hear? Hope we're not stuck on Zoom alone.
We can hear loud and clear. Yeah, I can hear loud and clear.
Oh, so yeah, I suppose everyone can hear. Yes, please, Michael.
Okay, yeah. So thank you so much, Kate, for that question. I think, yeah, for me, the surprising thing really is that, it's been over 2 years now since the book was released, and the excitement is almost like it was just released, a week ago or something, so that the interest has been sustained and prolonged, and there are new people discovering the book for the first time every day. And I still continue to see those photos people take about the book and talk about the book. So that's pretty surprising for me. And I guess the message is sent to me and to everybody out there is that there's an appetite, there's an appetite for the unheard. There's appetite to hear from those who we don't typically would hear from. There's an appetite for new stories that are different from the stories that we've always seen. And that's what that tells me. Will I continue to do that? I'm not sure, but it just shows that, we all collectively have to keep telling our stories. And it doesn't matter where you're from. There's an audience, there's a market out there that wants to hear these stories that have never been heard, and read about books and about characters and places that typically you won't find in literature, even more so African literature.
Thank you for sharing that. Zakashu, I'm kind of curious. When you started Bakwa magazine, what were some of the challenges? I always think when creating any sort of platform or resources for anything minority, it's always a problem. First, you need to start creating an audience, and then you have to start identifying who your major targets would be from the beginning. What was that for Bakwa Magazine? Share a little bit about that process.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question. So from the very beginning, Bakwa Magazine wasn't created as something that was like targeted for minorities. It was pretty much created to fill a gap. So there was like, I had just finished university, and then I realized that there was this absence so far as literary magazines. There's the space that literary magazines occupy. I realized that there was this absence in Cameroon, especially given that the earlier magazine that existed, Pala Pala magazine, ended around the beginning of 2011. So I spent very much of the year just thinking about why this space exists and why there is nothing, why nobody has come up with a magazine or a project. And it really kept bugging me, because I think I thought about it a lot, because like the first place where I was ever published was a literary magazine, and it was Pala Pala, which was also founded by a Cameroonian, and it ran from about 2008-ish to 2011. And when it ended, there was this real emptiness that I felt. And then it was also at the time where I was reading a lot, and I was like, there's this really wonderful projects out there. And in retrospect, when I think about this period, it kind of like reminds me of a quote by Done Jabe, where he says, if you so he said he wanted to be part of something great that did not exist, so he had to create it. And so this kind of leads us to the creation of Bakwa Magazine. And back to your question, so like, yeah, I was very naive. I was just like, okay, there's something that needs to be done, and I went ahead and did it. I did not think about all these other things that you think about when you want to do a sustainable project or sustainable magazine or anything like that. I was just like, yeah, this needs to be done, and let's do it. And I just went to a cyber cafe and started it. Like at least the good thing was that I knew WordPress, so I just went to the cyber cafe and started it. And at the time, I was also kind of like making my beginning in writing, so I had published in a couple of places, and I was beginning to know a couple of editors. And so I would reach out to editors and like tell them about this new magazine that I started, and ask them if they can talk about it or recommend writers. And based on that, I would reach out to these writers that they recommended. And at times I also reached out personally to writers that I knew in person, or writers that I'd read in different magazines, and say, hey, I just started this new magazine. It would be nice if you could contribute. And that's pretty much how the first couple of months were. And over time, I was able to build a team, and we're able to like rethink the strategy. And from time to time, we kept rethinking the strategy based on what we intended to achieve. And yeah, so that's pretty much how we kept growing to the point where we went from an online magazine to a print magazine to a publishing house right now.
That is incredible. Thank you for sharing, Zakasha. Really, I cannot even imagine. Michael, The Mechanic of Yenegua is a book that I think I am very fascinated about it. But what's really interesting is that your character in that book, the major character, Ebinibi, this is like a regular character in Yenogwa. So we're curious to know why. Why did you choose this title for the book? And why this person? You live in Canada. It could have been the mechanics of somewhere in what is the name of that city you're living in? Why? Why did you choose this city? And why that book title? We're very curious.
Well, as at the time I wrote that, Mechanics of Yanagua, I was still living in Nigeria, and I still lived in Yanagua. And I just wanted, I was working with the government at the time, and I sometimes saw how challenging it was for government to bring good traffic in terms of media to itself, how challenging it was for government to tell its own story for in a state to promote itself, because then it then feels like it's propaganda, right? Like, oh, in that sense. And so I felt like as an individual on my own personal level, with whatever skills I have, how can I draw the world's attention to Bielsa? And so that was how the title came about. And I'm happy that, since then I've moved and, I've made friends here, and they're able to read the book, and people will say to me, oh, after reading the book, I went and Googled, and now I know what Bielsa looks like. Or even people from back home who would say, I served in Bielsa, I did my youth service in Bielsa so many years ago, and reading the book brings back memories. And I know one person who said they read the book, and then when they traveled to Bielsa for a visit, they were looking for Kalakala Street. So things like that, make me happy. I have people here, friends here who would have conversations with me now. And then we're chatting, and then they will say something like "no wahala," and I'm like, "Where did you get that from?" It's made them want to learn pidgin English, or say to me, "Oh, who is Peter Obi?" Like suddenly they are interested in what's happening in Nigeria, right? Just because there's a book that has ignited that interest.
Thank you for sharing, Michael. That is quite fascinating. I can almost imagine, because I have never been to Bayelsa, never been to the city, but just reading your work depicts the city in such a beautiful light. And oftentimes, for most cities that are not really common in Nigeria, it's challenging to try to showcase the beauties in words. So thank you. Zakashu, I'm coming back to you because Bakwa magazine publishes, you said, a wide range of writers. What has the reception been since you started this? How many writers do you, and how do you choose writers that you decide to publish? Is it just Cameroon writers, or have you expanded to other African writers?
Thank you for the question. So first of all, with the kind of writers that we published, it's always, the focus has always been on African writers, be it African writers who live on the continent or those who live in the diaspora. But occasionally we've gone beyond this to publish writers from all over the world. And for example, in 2012, we had a collaborative issue with a Mexican magazine called the OFI Press, where the OFI Press published West African writers in English and Spanish, and Bakwa magazine published Mexican writers in English and Spanish as well. So that is an example of the kind of cross-country collaborations that we tend to do. But otherwise, our main focus has always been African writers. And with regards to reception, I would say reception has been growing a lot, and it has, the kind of reception that we get changes a lot depending on the kind of things that we do. But I think like our first main breakthroughs came about around between 2016 and 2018, where we decided to radically rethink the way we approach a literary magazine. So it was at that point where we said it's not enough to be just a place where we edit and publish writers from the continent, but we need to do more, because there's so many writers who don't have the skills. There's so many talented writers who need more than skills or places to be published. And so we started doing workshops, about 2 to 3 workshops a year, such that writers who had the skill but were not, writers who had the skill and needed to get better at this skill were able to workshop them, such that your work was able to grow and also become much more competitive. And this is really important for us. It's really important for us that our work is competitive at every level, because there's a lot of talent, and the more, and we feel the more we push the writer, the better they get. And it's also the job of the editor to make the work the best possible way that it can be. So in addition to doing workshops, we also started doing more and more collaborative projects. And the first kind of like main big collaborative project that we did was the Limbe to Lagos exchange, where we had workshops with Cameroonian and Nigerian writers in Cameroon and Nigeria. So the workshops happened both in Cameroon and Nigeria, as well as other events across both countries. And this again links to something that is very important to us in terms of like having cross country collaboration, because like Cameroon and Nigeria have a lot historically and politically, but more and more as time passes, there is less collaboration. So this was really important for us, and this exchange and workshops ended up in the publication of Limbe to Lagos nonfiction from Cameroon and Nigeria, which was very, very well received. Like it's right up to now, it's still probably our most popular book, and at least half the writers who went to the workshops and who were mentored are either doing MFAs or ended up getting really good agents, or are currently having book deals. So this really went a long way to impact the lives of these writers. And so like these different projects that we've been doing have really grown our audience and really grown the show up in all these places, and people who are familiar with our work, people who've been able to follow the work we do for all these years.
Oh wow, that is fascinating. Bakwa Magazine has done a lot. I have seen a lot of publications on your website, and I cannot even imagine how those stories came about, like how you go about the process of discovering these new voices. Thank you so much, Nze Kashu. Michael, I just have like a few more questions, and then I'll have anyone ask. I know there's a lot of questions waiting, possibly. But Michael, now you live in Canada now. So I'm curious, because most of your characters still revolves around African characters. So what is the level of connection or disconnect, if there is any, that you've been experiencing as you write about these characters, even if you live in a Western world currently?
That's a really good question. Yeah, before I respond, since I have Zekashu, and I hope, forgive me if I say the name wrong, I'm actually in the process of getting a new agent. So perhaps that's something you can help me with. Your success rate is amazing. Congrats.
Yeah, definitely. We can have a conversation.
Back to Kate's question. Actually, there hasn't been any disconnect, really, because Canada is actually a very diverse, multicultural society, right? You're walking on the streets and you would find everyone from everywhere in the world. It's not like in Nigeria where, it's pretty much homogeneous, or maybe some other places, right? It really is, and there's room for everyone's story. Curiosity, particularly in a place like Canada. So I don't really feel like I'm losing out. I feel like I've come here with a new voice, an additional voice that I could bring to whatever conversations are happening in the literary community here. So that's how I feel. People are curious, they want to know. And again, I remember attending a literary festival last year, and I was supposed to read from Mechanics of Yanagua. So of course, I went through the chapters, and I deliberately picked portions of the book that had proper British English that I had learned. And so I read those portions. And after the event, somebody came to me and said, I'd read the book, The Mechanics of It. This was a white lady that, I'd read your book. And I was really looking forward to hearing you read the parts that was in pidgin English. So I'm like, oh my God, that's a lost opportunity for me. So I think there's a huge interest, and so I don't really feel like I've lost anything. Instead, I feel like I'm gaining more audience.
Wow, interesting. That's quite insightful. I know there's usually this conflict between trying to be the person you've always been and then being in a new space and trying to probably write things that is really applicable to the new space. But thank you very much, Michael. Zekashu, Bakwa Magazines publishes mostly African writers, but you live in Berlin. What are some of the conflict, internal and external, you've been confronting?
Can you say that again? What are some of the
conflicts, if any, internal and externally, that you've conflicted as a publisher who lives in Berlin but publishes mostly African writers?
Yeah, actually, I don't think there's any conflict. I actually think this is a great opportunity to tap into a much more larger audience, a much more larger audience, a much more larger market, and to navigate a new space. Because as a publisher, I'm always interested in exploring new spaces and discovering new audiences, as well as bringing our existing products to a much more new space and new audiences. So rather than conflict, I see only endless opportunities right now.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Then the final one, the one that nobody wants us to talk about, this shame and fame. Both of you are coming from a country or a region in a country where there's a wide gap of representation when it comes to literature. And you've done so well. Bakwa Magazine is like one of the number one when it comes to publishing African voices online. And then Michael Afemfia, you are not just a Nigerian literary genius, but you're now in Canada, so it's more international now. Well, how does it feel to be this person when you're still trying to connect to who you are? I mean, you're from Bayelsa, and then Zgashu, you're from Cameroon. How does it feel whenever you go back home, or even while you're there? Do you still feel like the same person who is still representing the same cultural values? Or has there been any shift in time and space that have influenced your writing or your creative process?
Okay, I can go. I think personally, that's a really good question. Like, nothing has changed for me in terms of I don't see the need for change. I don't see the need to alter anything. I think originality is important in this sense, and I think that I'm going to stay true to myself. Have I learned new things? Yes. Am I the person I was, when I left Nigeria? No. As my worldview and perspective changed tremendously, so no doubt those things will be reflected in my writing, right? Because like you said, maybe my perspective is no longer local in terms of Yanagua or Nigeria, but even in terms of my work and everything, I get to advocate for every single human being, so the tendency to want to stay niched in that sense might not always be there, because now I know that that my focus is more of humanity in general versus Afrocentric, or my bias is towards Nigeria. So I believe that has changed me a lot, and more in my writing, perhaps that will show, because I think like at some point we all, even Skanchu here, we all would have started out because it was a passion for us. But then at some point, it becomes more than a passion. It's a responsibility that you carry, because people read you, people come to you for quotes, people come to you for advice. So it's a responsibility. And so that responsibility is one that I'm very conscious of. And so I will be remiss to say like I'm not conscious of being representative of an African voice or a Nigerian voice here. I do, and I bear that responsibility with all seriousness. But my scope has really broadened and widened, and I should be able to cater to that as well, but still original and true to the essence of what I am as a writer, my style, my technique, my voice. I'm not going to alter that for anything. I won't change that because the Canadian audience cannot appreciate my work the way it is, and so I have to dilute it or morph into something else. I'm not going to do that. But in terms of my worldview, it has definitely been expanded to accommodate my new society, and that will be reflected in my writing.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Thank you very That is deeply insightful. Zekashu.
Yeah. So I don't see myself as representative of any particular thing. Yeah, if I can put like, I really don't see myself representative as like either a group or country or anything like that. Or it's, and again, that's a very complicated conversation. But like my point is, everybody tends to claim me or claim backward, depends on how you look at it. So like everybody tends to claim backward because like we are seriously in, we care about building bridges, we care about building infrastructures, we care about making sure that collaborations happen. So it puts us in a place where we tend to be accepted or claimed in almost every circle that we navigate, because we are very much at the forefront of trying to build these infrastructures that are badly needed. Like we really need these publishing infrastructures on the continent. And yeah, I haven't really had any situations that have arisen, say within the context of being, say, representative of a particular country or region. And I guess it's also very much linked to my worldview. Yeah, I guess it's really linked to my worldview in terms of how I am also able to navigate a lot of spaces. And I think I've brought this dynamism to Bakwa, such that we're able to navigate all these spaces and be accepted in all these spaces.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, now it's time for questions. Lawrence, are you there? Yeah, please, questions. I don't know if anyone have questions for Nzekashu and Michael.
The audience floor is open now for question. Anybody has a question? Okay, there is a hand here.
Hello, to the panelists. My question is, you're traversing the 3 or 2 continents, and how do you reconcile the fact that Jennifer, what's his name? I'm sorry, please. Michael and Dejashu said something to the effect that the 2 of them cannot be alienated from their ancestral homes. They are trying to build bridges to different countries. How do you reconcile that? Being an internationalist writer and being a native at the same time. Would there be conflict?
I don't know if that was clear enough.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got it well, but I heard something about how do I reconcile being a nationalist writer and a native, something like that. Is that it?
Yeah, there's an echo in the background.
Also a publisher who is multidisciplinary or multiculturalist, and how can you reconcile that? Because you have to claim one or the other. If you are not claiming one or the other, how are you able to reconcile and build bridges, like you said?
You balancing both, or you able to reconcile both?
Yeah, okay. I'll try to answer this as best I can, although I still haven't gotten all of it. So again, for example, with the work that we do at Bakwa, our primary audience has always been an African audience. So like everything that we do is geared towards it's geared towards publishing an African audience. It's geared towards
sector as well. Is greatly funded by the Canadian government. So there is a body here in my province, my state, called SAS Culture that greatly funds the arts. So if you want to write a book, you can write a grant, submit a grant, an application for funding, and they will fund you to publish very reasonably so. So there's that whole support from the government here versus back home, but that's not the response to the question. The response is that so that Sask Arts has a project where they are promoting writers in the province, right? And just yesterday, my photo was published on their social media platforms to say, oh, it's summertime. If you're looking for a great book to read, here is one by this person, right? And then that was yesterday. I probably woke up in the middle of the night and saw that, right? And then a couple of hours later, in Nigeria, literally in Nigeria, in a literary festival being organized in Akwa Ibom State, right? So there's no reconciliation. Like, I have become two people, and I just morph from one to the next. I don't do any balancing. And so, take up Nigerian hat and put on the Canadian hat. Like, I'm just the same person, and I just naturally will transition from one event to another, from one conversation to another, and just be representative of who I am as a person, be representative of my culture, my background, my family, be representative of my home country, while adding on the values that I'm learning in my new environment.
And if I can add something, like, again, to come back to these notions around which your question was asked, these are notions that I go around thinking about. Like, it is who you are. Like, you don't need to think about who you are. That is who you are. It's almost as if, like, when you write a book, you don't say you're going to write an allegory. You write a book, and the book becomes an allegory because that is what you want to communicate. So, like, being, say, for example, a Cameroonian, I don't need to walk around thinking that I am a Cameroonian because it is who I am, and it reflects through everything that I do, for example.
Thank you very much, Zekashu and Michael. That was something that Michael said about the dual identities. Just made me laugh because wearing the two hat and being Nigerian when it's required, and then switching to being Canadian when it's required sounds like a very complex life. But thanks for sharing, Michael. I know that's not easy as it sounds. I know Michael has to go soon. Maybe I think we're actually right on time. Any last question? We'll take one last question.
Yes,
Any last question?
One. Mr. Lawrence, please help me. The guy at the back. Okay. My question is one question, but it actually has two parts. The first part is when you talk about the shame and fame, the identity is what we're talking about here. When you are there, hear bad news from where you're from, or you are discussing somewhere and they're saying this is what happens in your country, the leaders are stealing, or some scandal that just makes you feel one kind. Is that the shame that we're talking about? That you are from here and they see you as a representative of this place. Now, the other side of the question is, these many identities and how you're morphing, this is to Mr. Mike, you're changing, you're adapting. There is always a point in time where it becomes too much to handle from experience, where you see people having to say, I needed to pick one, I needed to show myself as one. It also actually troubles you in your writing. So when you're writing, you will now see that you're writing, you are coming from one side, and then suddenly you are going to the other side, and then at some point you just feel like, who am I, where am I, what am I doing? You actually want to get to the point where things are binary, where it's either yes or no. So when that happens, how do you handle that? Thank you very much.
I haven't heard anything beyond fragments from both questions.
Yeah, I think there is an echo. There was an echo. Could you please repeat the question? Maybe Lawrence can then repeat because Lawrence is closer to the speakers, to the Zoom. So could you please just repeat the question?
Move the mic away from your mouth. Okay. Can you hear me now? Well, okay. So I'll go ahead now. Mr. Michael, the morphing and adapting is a good thing, it's a good trait to have. But then when you are writing, you get to feel some conflict.
Oh, I think it's a network. There's something wrong. Lawrence, could you type in the question in the Zoom chats or something like so that we can respond to it? Because I know Michael has to listen. Please.
Michael, I can't hear you.
Can you, Lawrence, is that you?
Yes, it's me. I'm trying to get this question right. Can you hear me? Am I echoing?
Oh, yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, please can you put the question so the panelists can hear you?
Oh no, did we lost him?
Okay, now what he's trying to say is that you're talking about the shame in this context, and sometimes where you're from, there are stereotypes. You get to hear things about where you're from. Do you feel ashamed about that? Do you balance it, or now that you are in a more civilized place without stereotypes, without bad biases? Do you tend to identify with the new culture, being that you are now a multicultural person in the new place now and where you are from the old place? So do you try to shift to the new environment, or do you accept, the stereotypes attached to your place? Sometimes maybe corruption in the politics of where you're coming from. I think that is his question, if I'm right. Yes, that's his question.
I think it's something about stereotypes that is attached to underrepresented cultural groups. So I guess what the question is saying is that now that you're in a new place, you feel more secure, more confident. I think, I don't know, I hope I interpreted it right. I guess that's something about stereotype and feeling more confident. Michael and Zakashi.
Michael, I can't hear you, so maybe I should start.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that I mentioned that Canada is very multicultural and diverse. So people have come from all over the world, and every country has its own story, and every country has its own history, right? So there's nothing for me to be ashamed of. I mean, if I'm ashamed being Nigerian in Canada, then the Americans should be ashamed, considering everything that is going on in their country as well, all the the killings and shooting and their politics and everything. So there's nothing for me to be ashamed. It's our history, right? And everybody who has come here from a different country, even including the Canadians themselves, have their own history, right? So there's nothing to be ashamed of. For me, it's more of a learning process. Yes. I have names, but what I can learn from the Canadian structure, I would learn and take back. So it's more like a learning curve for me. Like I mentioned earlier, I see how supportive the Canadian government is for the arts and for creativity. That's something I have learned, that, if I send a proposal, my next book will be funded and I can holiday and travel somewhere and just sit down and write, because I know that the money is coming. Like Association of Nigerian Authors, all those bodies like that, we need to strengthen them with the experience that we have now to say, it's not the politics of going to beg money and saying I want to host a convention or I want to do this, I want to do that. How do we allocate money? How do we allocate money to talented people so that they don't have to live on the streets, they don't have to beg? How do we fund? I know how many people who text me or DM me and say, oh, I have a manuscript, I want to publish it, help me or connect me with someone. If our government was there for them, if they know that, I'm talented, I have this wonderful book or story I have written, and then the government can fund me to publish, then I can then launch out on my own and make a name for myself. Right, which is what the government here does. They support the creative industry, they support talented people, and we need to do that. So I have learned that now. I didn't know this 3 or 4 years ago, but I know that now that this works. Right. So how do I come back? How do I engage with the authors back home in Nigeria, with the associations and all that back home in Nigeria? Also, advocacy can we do? Instead of being ashamed, I'm learning, and I'm going to hopefully I can take that learning back and start a new conversation that can advance the interest of the literary community.
All right, that would be all the questions for now. Thank you all so much. But Michael, before you go on Zekashu, I just need you to maybe leave the room. The room is full of a lot of underrepresented writers, really brilliant writers, but oftentimes there is no platform or there is no connection to the global market. Zekashu, what are some of the advice, you're a publisher, that you can give upcoming writers, especially from underrepresented cultural group? Michael, what are some of the advice, maybe from your own experiences when you were, before you got to where you are today? What are some of the advices you can leave for the room full of writers? Thank you.
For me, it took me about a decade to get to where I am. Like, wasn't a breakthrough thing from, it took me some time. So I would say, don't give up, don't give up. We have a very recent example of the Nigerian athletes who just broke a world record, and in the past 2 or 3 competitions she had taken part in, she came fourth, and so she could have said to herself, why try, but when at the next try, she breaks a world record, right? So keep sending out your manuscripts. The last one may have rejected you in terms of publishing, but who knows, maybe the next one is the one that will say yes. So it's hard, it's easier said than done, but you just have to stay strong and believe in your craft, believe in your talent.
Yeah, and in addition to never giving up, it's also important to surround yourself with a kind of peer group of writers as well, so that all of you can grow together. It's important. Like, as a writer, you need to grow. And one of the ways that, one of the things that enables a writer to grow is to surround themselves with a peer group of writers as well. So like-minded people or writers. It's crucial for your growth as a writer, and always be proud of who you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, Zekashu. We deeply appreciate you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you too. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, I can hear you.
We are considering if we should go on with the next session. But looking at it, the moderator for this session is not on ground. But we have 2 people, 2 panelists on the waiting already in the room. We have Ememuko waiting in the room to start up to talk with the industry of fiction and nightmares. And we also have Vemba Sherry waiting. Is it okay if we continue?
All right.
The moderator is
I mean, it depends on it's not up to me. The audience, they're probably tired. You want to ask them. I don't know. Is everyone up for a final panel section? Is it a yes or a no?
Okay, the audience is saying that now that the moderator is around and then two people are joining online, that is only okay if we allow the session, however short.
Oh, okay. And then after this is the last one, right? After this is the palm wine and poetry, right?
After this one is the break and then we go for poetry night.
Oh, okay. Then I think we should just do it. It's what the audience wants. Thank you, Lawrence.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and patience. And I hope you're having fun. All right.
Hello?
Okay. Still, without any waste of time, I will welcome the moderator for the session. There's no other person but Iko Diana Abasi. You're welcome, ma. You're welcome.
Hey. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good evening, Vimba.
Good evening.
Yeah. It's raining here today and it's kind of dark.
Mm.
And there's no light. Okay.
We can see you now.
Yes. Nam says it is no light. I said, welcome to Nigeria.
Yeah, so hello.
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 Okay. Well, I can hear you all loud and clear.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Hello, everyone online. Bimba, Namse. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you. Good evening, I can hear you. I copy you loud and clear.
Thank you. So, we'll do this. This conversation, we're looking at fiction and how it is we use fiction to get away from reality, creating alternate existence for readers. And I'm so glad to be speaking with all of you here today. I had met Tekimini Paris earlier in the day. I thought she would be here this evening, but that's cool. So I want us, well, maybe I should start with you, Bamba Sheriff. Would you like to tell us what your writing process is, based on being able to get an emotional connection with your writers? Is this something you think of when you start writing, or how does that work for you, the process?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Kate, for inviting me. It's always a privilege to be part of a festival. I've always admired you and your efforts towards developing and contributing to African literature. And this is a very shining example of trying to set up a festival to celebrate African literature. So I'm very thankful to be part of this today. About my writing process, I think it began from my childhood with my love of books. I read a lot. I read not only the African novels, African classics published by Heinemann, but I was very interested in Arabic literature and also Russian literature. So I think for those of you who are dreaming of becoming writers and finding their voices, I think the best way to approach it is to read whatever is out there, to read the best. And there are many African novels that are really, really good. So the teaching process that will make them less confident. But I think actually is the other way around. The more you read, the more you gain access to the possibilities of literature. So it begins with reading. And my advice to those of young Africans who are starting out is to not be what I've learned. Yes.
Thank you very much, Vamba. So what I hear from you is that research is important, reading is important, so that the writer is able to understand the subject matter properly and explore it to the fullest. I think that's what I got from what you said. So, I mean, I was asking you that question because I know you've done fiction as well as non-fiction in your memoir, but I'll come back to you. Let me ask Emem. Emem, are you still there with us?
I'm here. Yes.
So,
hello.
Hi, I'm
okay.
here. So, I hear that your writing is suspense-filled, lots of plot twists, my kind of thing. So tell me, what's it for you when you're writing? Are you thinking of a strong emotional connection with your writers to carry them all through the novel? Is this the first thing you're thinking of? And then how do you ensure that you achieve this?
You know, that's a good question. So whenever a story comes to me, the thing is, I just write it. Like the way I feel as I go along the writing journey, I know it changes from time to time. And there are some times that I feel like my mood influences my writing. But the thing about making the audience or fellow readers and writers go along the battle. I've written a character once that I actually was afraid of for some reason because it just got dark. So I know that if I react a certain way, hopefully someone else would. And that's there are other ways I test this. Like when I'm done writing, I always have beta readers, right? And my friends and just people who are interested in looking at the manuscript. And I ask them, just tell me what you feel. Tell me where it just goes bland. Tell me where, like, what do you feel with this? Sometimes you can tell when someone is actually just trying to be nice to you or when they're honest because you remember the feeling while going through that, you know? So I hope, my hope is that my writing would just like someone, even if people don't relate to it, they can actually feel something. It doesn't matter where it comes from, like they should just feel something. So yeah, I know I should think more about the readers, but I just write the story. Like it just comes out and I just do that. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you,
I think.
I like what you said
Thank you.
about honesty and how it is that when you write something honestly, your reader will know and will feel it. So, like, I'm just wondering if you could pick out an example for us, maybe like a character or a situation in one of your books. Just talking about honesty and how it is, you know, honesty helps to capture the emotions in that particular scene. Do that for us.
I'll talk about like one of my first attempts of suspense. So it's one of my books called Hearts to Tell. And this is about a writer, but she goes through one of the worst things anyone can go through, like meeting somebody new, hoping the person is, well, normal, and then finds out that that's not the case. So I had one of my bosses who read this book, but she now told me I had to pray about this. And that was enough for me because she said she felt like it was going to be nightmare inducing. And that was the point, to really get to that point where you can see that, yeah, there are some humans who can do things and just out of this world. So when she said that to me, I knew I had hit it. So I knew it was something she felt and it was real because during my editing phase for that book, when I had to go back, I was like, wait, why did I write this way? Oh my God. But I knew it was finished and I didn't want to like change anything. So that's my example I'm going to use. The character's name, he was supposed to be like good boyfriend material, but he turned out, you know, there was like a family issue and they had their own side business of, you know, being bad people. So his name, is Jet. And that character sort of like, I think it materialized when I saw a documentary talking about like like sociopaths and psychopaths. So I learned a lot more about people and their intentions, and some that weren't even like planned out. It was just the way they are, like they were. So I got that, and then I formed this character that just became something. And so, yes, that is. I actually just have the book here. This one.
Yeah.
Is it a nice?